Hey everybody, welcome back. Alrighty, today's video is going to be, sadly, yet another correction video on some information around is immersive waxing good or not good. Now, I have no idea how long this one is going to go. I will try to plow through all the points as best I can. However, we have a bit of a fun one this time because we've got both a sheer volume of incorrect points that I need to correct, as well as the magnitude of how incorrect they are to get through. On the plus side with these videos, though, if you haven't seen a correction video before, they are, at the end of the day, very educational. So if you don't know that much about immersive waxing yet and you're wondering, is it for you or not? As well as, I guess, getting an idea as to who you wish to believe on the topic, being either, say, myself or, in this case, Reginald Scot. You'll also get a great idea as to whether or not immersive waxing is something that is going to be right for you or is not going to be right for you. Okay, let's get to it. Lastly, though, on the plus side, these videos, they do really help bust a number of the myths and misconceptions around immersive waxing, which have been put out by those who also don't know what they're talking about in this space. So it does help clear up some of those. Reginald certainly brings some new, never ever seen or heard before concerns around immersive waxing, and so we've certainly got some fun new ones to bust there. And yeah, at the end of the day, the whole reason behind all this is that for a lot of people, immersive waxing is just, one of their best decisions that they made in cycling, because it is so much simpler and easier than what it's often made out to be. One of the biggest feedback points we get around immersive waxing customers is, man, this is just a whole lot simpler than I thought. Why didn't I make this decision years ago to make the switch? And it's a decision that for a lot of customers or for a lot of cyclists it genuinely saves them so much money over time in the much lower wear rates, and it is a lot cleaner day in, day out. So for very little time and effort, you get some great benefits on a couple of great fronts. So your obviously friction and wear and your cleanliness. Whereas it's often portrayed as being this huge faff for not really that much benefit. So it is really, I think, important to debunk the poorest misinformation around immersive waxing, simply because it is a simple decision. Like just changing your lubricant choice is something that can just have such a big positive impact for a lot of cyclists around the world. And so I work very hard to ensure the best information in the lubrication space, and that includes, immersive waxes, wax strips, and wet lubes. There are some great wet lubes out there, and they could be the great best option for a lot of cyclists. My job is to make sure you have that best information, and so when videos come out that are just so horrifically incorrect, like the one we're going through today, that's why I work very hard to correct that and try to re-establish balance on having the actual information out there for you to make an informed decision about what's best for you. All right, so just in case you're not familiar, here at Zero Friction Cycling, I've been testing chain lubricants for nearly 9 years. We've completed over 500,000 kilometers of control testing, so through a very robust and exhaustive test protocol that runs for thousands of kilometers per test, includes dry contamination, wet contamination, and we're able to, we track the wear rates across the test so we can see how the lubricants are performing, as well as just quite extensive experience over, well over a decade plus of cycling and racing in mountain bike, cyclocross, gravel, road, time trial, as well as obviously liaising with quite a number in the industry in this space. So, I have a lot of information as to what works and why, and as you'll see, it's not that, at the level we need, it's not that complicated. It should probably do for setting up the intro on what we're doing today and why. Let's start having a look at what Reginald Scot has to say about his delve into immersive waxing.
Today's video was supposed to be titled chain waxing for lazy people or chain waxing for cheap people or cheap lazy people, because I am a cheap lazy person. I don't like spending money and I don't like to complicate my life that much. So that's what I aim to do with this video. Now, I made a video a long time ago saying that I would not be bothering to wax my chain for the following reasons. And of course, the pro-waxing community got together in my comment section and said, no, you misunderstand this, that, and the other. You really need to wax your chain. It's absolutely the bee's knees. You should do it. And I thought, you know what, to be fair, let's give it a really good try, because I haven't done that. I need to investigate this for myself. So that's what I've done. Now, I'll be absolutely honest with you straight away. Yes, I've made my system in this video quite cheap. Okay, so I've made it pretty much as cheap as I can. There are a couple of areas where it could be a little bit cheaper, and I'll tell you that in the video, so you can do that yourself if you wish.
That's cool, but just factor in, so if you've gone the cheapest path possible, and so he's hunted down just basically cheap candle wax, if your experience with that wax is then greatly different to what the people have been telling you, that should have been something that you factored in. If you're going to do a video slaying your experience around immersive waxing, it should be really highlighted that if somebody used perhaps a top commercial wax using a very refined paraffin wax blend base, that their experience may well be different to yours.
As for the complexity of the system, I've tried to make it as simple as possible, as easy as possible, as lazy as possible. Unfortunately, what I discovered is that there is no real way to make chain waxing very simple. There's always going to be a lot of steps. And if you streamline or skip too many of those steps, you end up ruining the process, okay? So
that'll be an objection, Your Honor, on that point. I don't think that really just for what should be simply re-waxing your chain after you've done the initial prep, that he could have really made it too much more complicated. And we can for sure simplify that an enormous amount and not ruin a thing. And I'll be able to explain very clearly why that is the case and what to do. And if Reginald tries again, he could have a whole new life around immersive waxing. Who knows?
You end up ruining the process, okay? So you will get problems later on if you skip certain steps, or it just won't work and you'll have to go around and do it again, okay? I got my information from a whole bunch of different sources. There's one particular person who people directed me towards who's kind of cornered the market in...
Okay, maybe I misremembered, so if you've got a bunch of different sources, that's great, but it seems like it was predominantly Oz. I think he does reference me as well.
All things hot waxing on YouTube, you know, full-time Australian, part-time canine pest control specialist, OzCycle. But I wouldn't recommend him, not because he's not passionate about the subject, not because he doesn't know what he's talking about, because I think he does, not because the information is not good, because I think some of it is. The issue I found with OzCycle, after watching 6 of his videos, was that I just got more confused the more I watched. The information, because he's been making waxing videos since the dawn of time, and he's got like there's about 400 waxing videos on YouTube, and I think 390 of them are his. If you just start watching his videos, you'll just get confused. It's information overload is what I'm trying to say, and a lot of it is conflicting information. He keeps changing his system, he keeps, you know, adding things, removing things.
The fireman, the greaser, the baker, they didn't know!
What I would recommend, and people are going to hate me for this because for some reason a lot of people online hate this guy. I don't really get why people hate zero friction cycling. Not fully, anyway. I kind of get it, but I don't get it. Anyway, zero friction cycling. I'm not endorsing his business. I'm not endorsing his product. I'm not saying send him money or anything like that. You know, that's all entirely up to you. But if you want to go to one location and get a really good overview on how to wax your chain, just go to his blog and read his blog start to finish. Okay.
That's quite funny. So I have no idea. I'm not online much, so perhaps the large world out there in online forums thinks I'm the biggest tool. Who knows? Obviously, people like Hambini and During Rider, I am super happy that they dislike me because they are not a crowd that you want to be positively associated with. As for the wider things, let me know. But what's interesting, so yeah, I've misremembered that he's reference to the zero friction cycling information from my first watch because I was too traumatized. But if he's looked at my website and have had a look at the information that we posted around waxing, I don't get how he's ended up where he's ended up. So thank you for that, and I'm sorry that I'm probably making you very upset with this video, and you'll be now more understanding as to you'll join the online hater crowd. But where has it all gone wrong if you've referenced ZFC as well as Oz? Because if you'd followed the instructions that I have, you would not have been so far wrong. Quick side tangent. Sorry if there's been a sound change with my microphone here. I managed to break the USB cable that I had in before, and I've had to hunt for another cable that does data and powers it up. And since that, it seems different. I don't know. I've had a quick play with the settings, but we must push on. Sorry if it's been a sound change, but that's why. New cable.
Okay, folks, so we have our old used wax chain here. We have our probe, so we can probe this thing like a farmer that nobody is ever going to believe. And this one has done over 300 kilometers since its last waxing. And if you look here, this is the piece of paper that this chain has been resting on after I removed it from my bike. And it is very dirty, as is this chain. As you
I'd just probably say that compared to a lot of wet lubricant chains, that doesn't look very dirty to me, even with these DIY wax.
can see. Let's look at the back side as well. Yeah, there's even more. So this stuff here is actually wax. I can scrape this off. Now the wax I'm using is white. It's completely white wax when it goes into my pot. And yet the wax on this chain is black, completely black. And the chain itself it feels dirty. Like after you've been handling it, you can feel like fine grit or fine coarse powder in your hands, which is bits of sand or salt and other fine particles that are stuck to this chain. So one of the first myths about wax chains is that they don't get dirty. That is, of course, not true. And it's an exaggeration when people tell you that wax chains don't get dirty. Sort of a half-truth, I suppose. Now, the theory behind wax and wax chaining is that because, number one, because wax is a solid, technically speaking, the idea is that things won't stick to it as easily as oil, for example. And, of course, that is true. Particles are going to stick to oil much more easily than they are going to stick to a solid like wax. However, not strictly true, because even if you have a sheet of glass, right, like a piece of a window, that's perfectly clean, you've polished it with alcohol window spray, you've given it a good rub down with window cleaner, and then you take that perfectly clean piece of glass and you put it outside and you leave it there for an entire day. If you do that and come back later, you will be able to see very fine particles of sand and dust and dirt that have stuck themselves to that sheet of glass. Because...
All right, just to explain why he's so incorrect on this particular point, I'm going to duck across to a Silcavello video where he demonstrates the best way to apply chain lubricant, which is basically applying it to the top span of your chain on the max chain line angle that you can basically back pedal your bike, so big ring, big cog, or big ring, second largest cog, and applying it just before the cassette, because at that point on the max chain line angle, the parts of the chain are open. They're sort of flexed open from that angle, and then as they run over the cassette, obviously the cassette is straight, so the cassette will straighten those links up, and that sort of open and closing action forms really quite a pumping action and pumps the lubricant through the chain. And that helps penetration, especially for some wax strip lubricants. This just give me an important thing as I just discussed the next point, because he's just got a fundamental non-understanding of something that he really should understand with his experience in cycling.
And this is a little section of Shimano 12-speed Dura-Ace XTR chain, and it has been completely stripped and is clean and dry. And so you'll see what it looks like here. You can see here's me kind of touching it, and you can see the wedges that I'm talking about. See, as I articulate it, this wedge opens, and then if you articulate it the other way, the wedge opens. What you can't see here are those inner journals opening like this, but you can imagine that the exact same effect is happening inside the chain under that roller. But to show you how powerful this is, what I'm going to do, I'm going to scoot this chain kind of out of the way, open my lubricant here, and I'm going to put a drop of the lube onto the paper. And so you see my little drop of lube here is sitting, you can see it's got, you know, good surface tension against this Post-it note that I'm using, and it's stood up nice and tall. I'm going to put the chain right on top of it and then show you how the pump works. It will actually pull the lubricant up into the chain. This is pretty cool. So let's check this out. So there's my lube. I'm going to set it right on top. And you can see it starting to capillary into the bottom of the chain. And look at it capillarying around. And now watch what happens as I pump. Oops. Look at that. It's actually pumping from the bottom up into the top of the chain.
Right, so just the base thing he hasn't understood to begin with regards to the difference from a wet lube to a solid lubricant, is that the wet lubricant, I mean, he acknowledges that that is going to attract a lot more dust and contamination, a lot more is going to stick. But the big piece from there is that the particles of dust and sand and salt, wherever he's riding, that stick to your wet lubricant, and they will stick on contact much more readily than a chain that has a solid lubricant on it, is that from that moment they are pumped right through the chain. They become part of the lubricant deep inside the chain, all throughout the chain. So from kilometer zero, if you're riding out in dirt and dust and salt and sand, your chain lubricant is becoming more and more and more abrasive. The solid wax lubricant, whatever dust sticks to the outside of the chain, it does not have a medium or a pathway to easily get from outside the chain to deep inside the chain. Now, some can get down between the side of the rollers and the inner link plate, and between the side of the inner and outer link plate, which is the pointy razors, and I'll cover that. But deep inside the chain on the main load surfaces especially, so underneath the roller on the inner link plate shoulders and the pin to the inner link plate bore, I might get a pic of those up. Abrasive contamination has a super tough time getting all the way in there to cause increased abrasiveness and wear on your main load parts, and that is what's responsible for the elongation wear of your chain, which then becomes responsible for wearing out your drivetrain components. So it is the fact that he could feel some, you know, sand or salt or whatnot on the outside of his chain from wherever he rides. That means nothing with regards to having an awesome slippery layer of wax inside his chain on the main load surfaces where it really counts, and that is not the case if he's riding in those same conditions with a wet lubricant. Got the pic, so you can see here with the outer plates removed. So you imagine with a solid lubricant, dust that is stuck to the outside or maybe even got down in between the roller and the inner link plate, it then has to get around the shoulder and through this tiny little gap between the inner plate link shoulders to get to the pin. There is not really any access. This is why some lubricants have some penetration issues. The outer link plate, you can see the chamfer there, that nestles into, you know, this part of the chain here. That really quite effectively prevents even lubricants from getting to the pin between the inner and outer plate links, because they hit that and pretty much just run around it. So dust doesn't have access to get to the pin via that path. Its only path is underneath that roller and then between that tiny gap to get to the pin. Solid lubricants, dust just doesn't really do that with a solid lubricant at all. It just doesn't penetrate that deep. It needs water, so you need a wet conditions ride to run, you know, the water running right through the chain to bring that contamination all the way in if you are running an immersive wax. In here is basically protected from all abrasive contamination. Just eventually you will wear through your wax treatment when it's obviously time to re-wax. So that is just a big misunderstanding. So it's a two-pronged attack as to why wet lubricants suffer so much versus solid lubricants for use on a bicycle chain out exposed to all the environmental contamination. One is the vastly greater amount that it attracts to begin with, and two, it provides a pumping great medium right through the chain. Just sending that right through everywhere from every link articulation. The solid lubricant is resisting becoming contaminated vastly greater, and what does stick to the outside has no path inside. So I really hope that me hammering home that point shows just such a massive difference as to why the wear rates are so much greater for wet lubricants versus a solid immersive wax, because a bicycle chain is a really extreme challenge for wet lubricants. It's just, it's a tough task for them to try to not become abrasive.
So dirt will stick to anything, any surface that exists, dirt is going to stick to it. The next theory behind wax chaining or chain waxing is...
So again, surface is very different to inside, and it is inside that matters.
That if you look here, we've got a roller, and there is a gap either side of the roller. I've actually taken one of the rollers out of this thing. So here we are, look, this is where one of those rollers fits. Here is the roller. And the idea is that when you put wax down inside this gap inside here, the wax sits between these two plates and it provides a little barrier which prevents dirt from getting down inside these gaps. And if dirt can't get down in between these gaps, it can't wear out the rollers, it can't damage the chain, it can't get between these two plates here because those gaps are filled with wax. That's the theory. In reality, that doesn't actually work. Yes, it provides a little bit of a barrier, especially when the chain is freshly waxed. But as soon as you start to break up the links when you put it on your bike, if you look here, you'll notice that it has to be able to bend like this, right? The chain has to be able to bend like this. In order for it to move freely and bend like this, there has to be a gap, okay? So there can't be some solid material in here, like glue or something blocking that gap. So there is always going to be a gap. And if there's a gap, particles can get in there. The other thing about this chain is because it's being used on a road bike, road bikes usually have gears, right? You go up and down your gears on the front and the back. Okay, so you got your front derailleur, your rear derailleur, your cassette, your chain rings. Whether you have 2 or 3 or 1, doesn't matter. The chain still has to move. And if I do this here, look, see, the chain is bending slightly. You can see it more when the chain is long. See, look, that's the chain bending. That happens when you change gears. That bending motion over time, continuously bending, continuously moving along those gears and riding up and down on those cogs, that shakes all the wax out of the chain. Okay, as it bends like this, that wax gets squeezed out the gaps, and then it bends the other way and it squeezes the wax out the other way. And like I say, eventually the wax comes out the chain. And wax is soft, right? So if granules of dirt or bits of sand or whatever get down inside those gaps and they get between the two plates and there's wax in there, which of course there is, and the plates start bending and squeezing together like this as you change gears and as you ride, those particles of dirt get pushed into the soft wax. So you end up with wax impregnated with little bits of grit.
All right, let's deal with the dust part first. Yes, dust, if it gets down the side of, say, in the gap between the side of the roller and the inner link plate, and between the inner link plate and outer link plate, you will have dust or any abrasive contamination in between those parts and pressed into and part of the wax. But you have to remember what you're comparing the immersive wax path to, which in this case is versus, say, oils or wet lubes. The dust for your solid lubricated chain has to pretty much have your whole shot to get down in between those parts. It will happen if you're riding in dusty conditions. You will get some dust down between those parts. But versus an oil, the dust can hit any front-facing part of the chain. It is going to stick to your oil or wet lubricant on contact, and then it becomes part of that, and it gets pumped through the chain. So all the abrasive contamination that is sticking to the oil or wet lube, it increases its abrasiveness, which is abrading on all parts of the chain, including the high load parts, or the much higher pressure parts, which is the pin inside your inner link plate bore, and the roller sitting on the inner link plate shoulders. So those main load parts that take the bulk of your pedaling load are now also seeing an increasingly abrasive lubricant because of how oils and wet lubricants work, as opposed to a much, much smaller amount of dust that has to get between those parts that is only coming into play with an increase in friction and abrasion on those side parts as you increase your chainline angles. So those parts take some of your pedaling load. It's only some watts of your pedaling load. When you say go to max chainline angle and put more load on those parts, that is when that is going to come into play. So it's going to be much less, have a much, much lower impact because it's not on the main load parts. I don't understand why he's raising this as a concern, because when you compare it to what is happening on the other side of the coin, it is obviously, this is not opinion, it is obviously, factually, logically, much, much better. It is going to be much less contamination attraction, having a much lower impact and wear. All right, next on all the wax being pressed out and falling out, especially because you're running derailleur chains, which are going to go onto a chainline angle. I mean, this is another one that is just so obviously, incorrect. And again, if he's thinking about lubrication on a bicycle chain, it should be very obvious to him as well. If you don't have lubrication on those parts, you will know about it. So if all the wax is just pressed out and you don't have any wax there anymore, then your chain is very quickly going to sound and feel horrible, because there's a very distinctive, dry, not nice sound and feel when you don't have any lubrication on those parts. And that really shows up first when you're running your higher chainline angles and actually putting load onto those parts. So the key thing with immersive wax treatments, or a lot of wax drip lubricants, is that they let you know when the treatment lifespan is getting done, especially on those parts, because everything will be silky smooth in your straighter chainline gears. But then after, say, X 100 kilometers, as you start to use your higher chainline angle gears, you start to get that very distinctive dry sound and feel. And if you keep on going, that distinctive dry sound and feel just gets worse until the chain starts squeaking, because you have metal on metal when you're loading up those parts, because all the wax treatment is gone. In short, insufficient or no lubrication on those parts, it lets you know very obviously and very easily. If he was riding and experiencing a silky smooth chain, especially on the high chainline angle gears, then there is lubrication on those parts. You only need a very, very thin layer of wax bonded to the chain metal to have your very effective immersive wax lubrication on the parts. That's all that's left. That's why there's excess that is pressed out when you're breaking that wax treatment in from deep inside the chain, as well as between those side parts of the chain. At the end of the day, you only have an extremely thin layer of oil if you're using wet lubes between those parts as well. And at some point, most wet lubricants will give out at a certain time as well, and your chain will start to feel and sound dry. So, I mean, that one is just obvious. So no, not all the wax is pressed out because you have put your chain on a chainline angle. You are having excess out. You are left with the layer of wax that you need to lubricate those parts, and it will lubricate those parts for X 100 kilometers depending on your riding and your conditions, and it will let you know when that wax layer is insufficient and it's time to re-wax or top up with your wax strip lube. So yet again, this is not opinion. This is basic, obvious, logical fact. If those parts do not have lubrication, you will know about it. If your wax chain is riding lovely on your chainline angles for X hundreds of kilometers, they are lubricated for that time. All right, one last point on that. So aside from the objective factual reality that you will know if you don't have any lubrication between those parts, really obviously, then the other thing we know is just the wear rate. So, over the time, not just myself, but I deal with a lot of cyclists all around the world and for a very long time, both with waxing, wax strips, wet lubricants, everything. And so, we have a lot of experience with chain wear rates, and also with, especially now, thanks to the Abbey Tools LL Chain Checker tool, we get even more accurate measuring of lateral wear versus elongation wear. If you had insufficient lubrication there, just the bulk of the time that you're cycling on those side parts, over time you're going to get excessive lateral wear of your chain versus elongation wear. And that is just not what is seen at all. So when immersive waxes are doubling, tripling, sometimes even much more, the elongation wear lifespan of their immersive wax chain versus what they were using previously, their lateral wear is in line still with their elongation wear. So when they've got, say, 3 times the elongation wear lifespan, the lateral wear has also been, extended or tripled to that same point. So my last chain that I finally had to replace after years of doing a lot of hard mountain bike riding, this is the bike that does most of the winter work as well, so when it's wet and muddy and crappy and I'm going to go hit the trails, this is the bike I use. Finally wore to pretty precisely 0.5%, which is where I want to get a chain dead on, after 11,000 kilometers of hard mountain bike training in a lot of crappy conditions, and the lateral wear on that chain was pretty much perfectly in line with the elongation wear. And that's just something that is, again, repeated just ad infinitum out there in the world. So there's a lot of just simple reality of the lateral wear and elongation wear matching that backs up the simple fact that you're also not noticing that your chain feels and sounds horrible very shortly after your immersive wax, as soon as you put it into any high chainline angle cog. Oh, almost forgot on that section. So he also raises a concern around the softness of the wax increasing as the temperature increases. So yes, it will, but unless it becomes an actual liquid, which I've never seen, you still have a solid. You still have any dust that has managed to whole shot penetration down between those parts, being pressed into and becoming part of the wax between those parts. It still is not like an oil that now gives it a nice free path to go to the very high pressure, high load parts of the chain that are going to be responsible for the elongation wear and much higher efficiency loss as it becomes more and more abrasive. Being stuck in a softer solid versus a slightly less softer solid really makes zero difference. You still have a solid lubricant in your chain. So I don't know really what he's trying to get at, because he hasn't understood any of this whole scenario. So raising concern about a wax being softer, I don't know. What is he? Who cares? Who cares? It's still an immersive wax. You still have a solid wax in there. A lot of wax drips, which have proven to be, again, massively more contamination and wear resistant versus wet lubricants on average, they are much softer typically than your immersive waxes, but they are still a set wax. They are still not providing a medium or a path for contamination to be pumped around in a liquid like your oil and wet lube does. Reginald, what is going on?
There is wax in here a little bit. There's a bit in the middle, there's a bit on the edge here, there's a bit on the inner plate. You can see the bearing surfaces where this roller rotates. You can see inside the roller it's polished, where the roller has been running on those plates, on those little nubs here. And the bearing surfaces are all shiny, and in the middle is just dirty wax. Because the dirt on the chain isn't just coming from the outside environment. The dirt is actually coming from a few different places. Number one, there may be dirt in your wax. If you've repeatedly used the same wax over and over again, some particles of dirt are going to find their way into that wax, right? The second thing is that as this chain moves, okay, along as you use it, of course it's going to wear. Now the wax is designed to prevent wear, acting as a lubricant, but I actually would say that oil is a more effective lubricant when oil is clean, okay, because the way oil spreads around a chain and stays in between the rollers is more effective, in my opinion, when the oil is clean. Whereas wax, it's stiffer, it's less, I would say it's less good as a lubricant. It doesn't spread, okay, it stays in position. So if some wax gets knocked out, okay, and you lose a little bit of wax in here, it won't get kind of recoated. Whereas with oil, even if oil drips out your chain, there's enough oil in there to keep circulating around and lubricating everything.
All right, so, I mean, nothing against a high quality wet lubricant or oil if you're able to keep that clean. And we've tested a number of those that are outstanding. And if you only ride in, say, dry road conditions, and it's a proven top option, then you're going to have a great time overall. Really low wear over a very long time with not too much maintenance. However, that's not everybody, and there's also a huge variety or variance in performance. And so, if you look at the testing, we can see that quite a lot of wet lubricants are just very high wear, even in the clean test block 1, which has no contamination. But overall, how well, let's say you've got a quality oil or wet lube, how well that is going to go over time is going to depend on your level of contamination exposure for your riding. So where do you ride, what does it get and how much? And obviously your level of maintenance commensurate with the amount of crap it's being thrown at it. But what you can't do in his position is look at the inside of a chain where he's using just some cheap candle wax and sort of poke around and say, don't think this is very good. I don't know if this is actually providing good lubrication. You know how you know if a lubricant is providing good lubrication or not, and that is if the chain wears very slowly versus meh versus really rapidly. So this is where if he'd actually put in the time to do some long-term testing and track some wear rates of immersive wax chains versus non-immersive wax chains, then he might have a bit of an idea from his own experience. But then he could also consider, well, how come so many people and also control testing is showing immersive waxing to have so much longer wear life? How would that be possible if there is poor lubrication going on inside these wax chains? This is where his just off-the-cuff thought bubbles and I guess bias against wax and bias towards oil doesn't match up with a huge amount of information from the world of reality. Now he also pops up on screen, so in case you're just listening to this on audio only, he puts up on screen like name me say a automobile or marine or airplane application where they're using wax. And I'm sorry, Reginald, but that is just not very smart thinking. A lubricant, the best lubricant option for a particular use case is what we should go with. For, say, injection molding dyes and die cast and so on, they use a dry graphite spray or ceramic spray to get the parts out of the mold. That's a great lubricant option for those that don't want to use an oil. If you think that automotive is such a great comparison, why aren't you running motor oil on your chain or diff oil or transmission fluid? It is just a nonsensical cross-correlation. We don't put wax in our roller bearings, in our bottom brackets or wheel hubs because it would go terribly. But it just happens to be an amazing option for the sliding parts for chain links that are articulating, obviously not through full revolutions. We have a huge amount of parts per link, so there's basically 8 different sliding surfaces that need to move from static to articulating and then moving from static to reticulating back. The extremely low stiction, no viscous friction, and just that solid lubricant coating protection that resists contamination has turned out to be an amazing lubrication option for the use on a bicycle chain. That doesn't mean you should wonder why it's not being put into an engine or into a transmission in a car. That is, I'm sorry to say, a stupid correlation or analogy.
As these rollers roll, as you've got these bearing surfaces moving against each other, this basically starts to become metal on metal, There's grit in here. There's dirt in here.
Okay. If there's grit in there and if there's dirt in there, then if he's running an oil, the amount of grit and dirt is going to be a lot higher than with his solid wax. If he's talking about metal on metal, that is only going to be taking place if you're running that wax treatment way too long. If you are re-waxing at normal intervals, then you have a wax coating your metal parts, protecting them from wear. So I don't know what he's on about there.
Rotating against this chain, and what eventually happens is you start to wear the chain. Of course, even wax chains wear out. So a lot of this blackened dirt is actually metal. It's powdered metal that's coming off the chain.
Oh man, all right. If he's got powdered metal going on in there, that there's sufficient amount that he can visually see it and tactile feel that there's powdered metal there, something has gone very, very wrong. And obviously the wear rates of that chain would be extremely high, so easily tested and detected if he did a wear rate over kilometers test of his immersive wax versus oil. That's just nuts. So either, yeah, something's gone very wrong with his prep and the wax hasn't bonded, and so quite quickly there's not been a wax layer on the surfaces inside the chain to protect them from wear and lubricate the chain, or he's run that wax treatment way too long for his riding and conditions and just worn off the wax. The wax doesn't get knocked out of your chain, it gets worn off. So yeah, he's either run it way too long for the treatment and ended up metal on metal for a substantial period of time to end up with powdered metal, or he has had a poor wax bond from incorrect prep. It's also worth noting, so he seems to be referring a bit that his wax is quite dirty, and that is quite probably likely due to the fact he's bought a cheap-ass wax. If you just buy a candles or candle wax from somewhere, your waxing experience, so one person to another, one country to another, or one area doing this, it does vary quite enormously, because what you get, who knows? Your cheap paraffin and candles will typically have a very high oil content because it's not very refined paraffin. They can often have other impurities in there, such as soy, palm oil. They might be adding scents and stuff. So it is those DIY waxes that are responsible for the horror stories that we get from mechanics when someone brings in their DIY immersive wax chain and drivetrain, and everything's so gunked up that they can't even shift the gears. That is not the experience when you use a good commercial wax, because obviously their wax blends are amazing. Or even if you just spring a little bit more and get something like a proper food grade or canning wax. So something like golf canning wax, if you don't want to go all the way to paying for a top commercial wax. But yeah, if you just get a cheap-ass candle wax base from God knows where, you will get God knows what. And your experience is going to be, obviously, potentially very different to, I guess, what we call immersive waxing in general. Most people are buying a actual commercial product. The actual DIY wax crowd, I don't like. I can only give a guess as a percentage, but from my experience in this space, which is extensive, the DIY wax crowd versus those purchasing a commercial product, it is a very small subset, and they have within that subset, a very wide ranging of success with their results. Whereas if you purchase a top commercial wax that's been tested and it's awesome, you get a very, much more assured outcome. It is going to be much cleaner, longer lasting, lower wear. You know what you're getting. What his is delivering him, who knows? But even if it was crap, I like cheap crap wax that's oily, dirty, contaminated stuff to begin with, then still on top of that, something has gone wrong with his prep or how long he's run it. So powdered metal, reviewing your immersive wax chain by taking it apart, that's a hint something's very wrong. And obviously that information goes against what the rest of the waxing community is telling you about how awesome waxing is with regards to chain wear longevity. Wouldn't that be a hint that, wow, everyone's telling me how awesome waxing is, and yet I open up my chain, I've got powdered metal? Is that a hint that perhaps you need to investigate further as to what's gone wrong on your end, as opposed to your one n equals 1 situation there and calling the entire waxing world crap.
And there's one more thing I've noticed as well that contaminates your wax as you use your chain, and that is paint. What am I talking about? Now, if you look at 105 nowadays, Ultegra, Dura Ace, SRAM, SRAM Red, for example, all the leading group sets, Campy as well, they've all started painting their chain rings black. So that paint bits and fragments actually gets onto your chain as well. So that's another reason why the wax gets dirty.
That's a new one. Let's just say, because I don't want this is going to turn to be like 4 hours. That is incorrect. So, whatever absolutely minuscule weight of and volume of paint that may be coming off a chain ring, that is going to just flake off, especially with an immersive wax, because you've got just some solid wax on the outside, or when that excess is already flaked off, you don't have really anything on the outside of your chain. So whatever paint or anodizing does wear off a chain ring, it's just going to go off into the wind. If there was to be any contamination of such to a lubricant on your chain, the only way that would really occur is if you were running a wet lubricant, which would absorb that as it's wearing off and then transport it through the chain, and it's obviously becoming part of the oil. But no, find me anyone who has any knowledge in the bicycle chain lubrication space who will agree that paint coming off chain rings is going to contaminate your immersive wax. I would consider putting up a pretty decent prize money. So reach out to the Josh Portners or the experts at M Speed Wax or Rex or Ceramic Speed, or like anybody tell me how paint or anodizing off your chainring is contaminating your wax to a degree where, I mean, it is such a minuscule thing that is just going to be immediately gone. Or even if some did get in there, it's going to then be distributed amongst all the hundreds of mil of wax in your pot on Next Rewax. Vastly less percentage of paint to lubrication than what would be in your chain when you just add 3 mil more lube on your Next Relube. What is going on? I never thought I would be discussing that particular point about immersive waxing in my life. Maybe somebody wants to do a test. They can run a wax or a wet lube chain to its 0.5% wear rate allowance with whatever lubricant they want, including, say, a wax. And they can do that with a painted chain ring versus doing that with a non-painted chain ring, and see if they can detect a wear rate difference or any performance difference. I mean, you would need the resources of CERN to detect any difference between a painted or anodized chain ring and not. Oh my God, okay.
Zero Friction Dude says is only use new chains, never use an old chain that has been used with a different kind of lubricant.
Zero Friction Dude does not say that. Zero Friction Dude knows what he says because he's there when he says it or types it. I caution, or just basically put out for you to consider, is it worth putting potentially 3-4 litres of solvent through a used chain to prep it for waxing versus just continue on with that chain as is, and then when you go to your next new chain, that's a great time to switch to immersive waxing if you're looking to do that. Now, whether or not column A or column B is for you depends on a number of things. Now, if you've done 1,000 kilometres on a chain that costs you $45 and it's going to cost 4 litres worth of mineral terps and then some metho to prep that for waxing, it can be a tough call, especially depending on if the lubricant you were using before wasn't great and you've already used up half the chain's wear allowance. If you have a SRAM Red E1 chain or a T-type chain or a SRAM Eagle X01 or XX1 chain, that's a different ballgame because a number of those chains are very hard wearing to begin with and they're much more expensive. And so if you've done 1,000 kilometres on one of those, it is often well worth putting the mineral terps and metho through it to clean that up to get it ready for waxing, because you'll only have used a tiny amount of the chain's wear life. And you're going to have then a huge lifespan with it on lovely, clean, immersive wax. And it's an expensive chain, so you don't want to just bin that or burn up the rest of it with running an ever-increasing amount of grinding paste. So that is the advice that I have given since day dot. And that is obviously pretty sane and logical kind of thought to follow.
For example, oil. Now, I didn't listen to that when I first started my experiments. I went away and I straight away got the chains that were already on my bike. I washed them really, really well, and I started waxing them. And immediately I ended up with chains that ended up very, very dirty. And no matter how well you think you've washed your chain or how many processes of washing you put through with your chain, you will never remove all the dirt from an oil-based lube from your chain. It's basically impossible. It will hide, it will find a way to hide in there. And then with the heating process of the waxing, you will displace that dirt. And so that dirt will then contaminate your wax, and you will end up with a chain that gets dirtier much faster.
No. So you would have to do a pretty darn terrible job at trying to clean your chain for waxing, for then when you wax the chain that all this dirt's coming out of nooks and crannies and fissures and contaminating your wax, and you get this crappy dirty wax chain. And it's an illogical thought path. All right, so let's say we have just, done a attemptedly good job. Is attemptedly a word? I'm not sure at this point. At cleaning your chain to get it ready for waxing. So you've cleaned a lot of crap out, but let's say you didn't do it perfect, and you've left in some crap in your chain. How much have you left in there? Have you left in a gram of crap across your chain, which would be a lot of crap left in there? More likely it's going to be maybe 0.1 of a gram, less than 0.1 of a gram. Just for rounded purposes though, let's say somehow you left a gram of crap inside your chain because you did a crap clean ready for waxing. So you've done that clean. Now you've put your chain into the wax pot with hundreds of mil of wax. So you now have that crap that's heated up. It's going to get distributed. You're swishing the wax through the chain. So you've got whatever contamination left in your chain is basically being distributed amongst X hundred mils of wax in your wax pot and whatever then comes out of the wax in your chain. Let's compare that to if you are doing some chain maintenance because you're using an oil or a wet lube, and you go, you know what, it's time for me to flush clean my chain. So you flush clean your chain, you will face the exact same situation where whatever method that you're using to clean it, you're going to be X amount successful at a great chain clean. So there's going to be some left inside your chain. You now re-lube your chain, having done your clean, and a typical re-lube with an oil is going to be around about 3 mil. Some a little bit more, some a little bit less. Your chain is going to be over 100 links long. So you are applying approximately 0.03 of a mil per link of lubricant going into your chain and whatever crap is left in there. Which do you think has the better lubricant to contamination ratio at the end of both of those paths? So his entire thought train on ending up with some contaminated crap wax on the chain because you can't do a perfect clean of an existing chain, that is utter nonsense, and obviously it falls apart against what he's comparing wax chains to, which is using an oil. The other thing is that, like, if his wax is already dirty, if he's tried to clean his chain, again, unless he's completely cocked it up and he's ended up with a dirty wax, the most likely cause of that is the cheap, crappy wax that he's bought. Unless he was using motor oil sludge, did an absolutely shite job to clean it, then the only other culprit really in the equation is going to be the cheap, crappy wax if he's ended up with a dirty wax chain and he's actually tried to clean the chain properly for waxing. Either way, the outcome he can choose from what he's put forward to is completely illogical and doesn't make sense and is incorrect, or he's got really crap wax and did a crap clean job.
I think the best chains to wax are chains like this, like Shimano chains. This kind of material, this kind of metal on the Shimano chains, on the 105 chain, is the best because there's absolutely nothing between the wax and the metal to get in the way to prevent the wax from sticking to it. This BBB one comes with hollow pins and hollow outer plates, And this chain here from KMC comes with hollow pins, hollow outer plates, and hollow inner plates. And what happens is when you wax these lightweight chains, which I prefer to use, and I was using previously with oil, all the wax fills up all these holes and all these plates, and you spend absolutely forever poking with a toothpick trying to clean out all the holes because you paid extra money for a lightweight chain, and now it's all full of wax. So you're actually adding weight to the chain with wax that gets stuck inside the holes.
I'm a little lost for words here. I'll probably end up saying a whole lot though, but what do we do? What do we do with this? So I don't know. In all my time, and I've been doing this for a bit of time, and I deal with a lot of people, waxing and writing in the lubrication space at all levels, as do many others working in this space. Never have I ever heard of the weight of the wax in the hollow pins be a thing. I have I took a pause. I come back and rewatch that, and I'm still pretty stunned. I pushed out all the wax from a freshly waxed chain from the hollow pins on a YBN, and it doesn't even weigh. It doesn't even register 1 gram on the scales. There are a lot of things that you can do if you are concerned about wax in your hollow cores to save a gram somewhere else and get back to square. It doesn't offset what you've paid for your lightweight chain. 1 gram, not even 1 gram. Depending on your writing, there are other things that may get into those hollow pins as well. Water weighs more than wax. Mud weighs more than wax. I think this is a tie-up. Wax in your hollow pins versus paint coming off your chain ring as to what is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard in all my time in chain lubrication, period. That's a new one. I'm sorry, almost forgot because that just practically gave me a mind reset. I don't know what he's basing the Shimano being the optimal chain for immersive waxing. He stated that it's because he thinks there's nothing getting in the way between the wax and the chain metal. Wax needs to bond to the parts inside the chain. You don't need wax on the outside of the chain at all. You don't need lubrication on the outside of the chain at all. You need it inside the chain. That is where all the action is happening. Shimano chains overall have proven to be slightly less optimal versus some other brands because Shimano's Siltec low friction coating can inhibit the wax bonding to the chain metal inside. And so what we get, so just literally from years and years and years of both myself as well as countless waxing customers using immersive waxing across every branded model of chain, what we tend to find is that versus say YBN, Campy, SRAM and so on, the Shimano chains, their wax treatments start to sound and feel a bit more dry, a bit more quickly versus those brands I just mentioned. And KMC seem to be a step greater than that, again, where they a number of their models can start to sound and feel really dry really quickly versus really anything else. So I don't think he has the waxing experience across multiple brands' chains and knows what's in the different brands' chains and what they use for their low friction coatings to make a call at this stage that Shimano is the optimal. They're certainly not bad. Wax life and Shimano chains overall goes brilliantly, but stating they're the best chain, he lacks the knowledge to make that statement.
That's got a shiny metal surface like this, or a shiny metal surface like this, is again the wax doesn't stick to it very well. Whereas again the wax sticks really well to the basic uncoated 105 chain.
So he's just on the complete incorrect knowledge path. What is on the outside of the chain matters not at all with regards to wax and lubrication. So shiny silver, shiny gold, shiny any color, dull metal, uncoated, coated, plated with whatever, makes zero difference. All of the workload, all of the action, all of the friction is happening inside the chain where the parts articulating under up to generally many thousands of psi on the pin to the inner link plate bore and the inner link plate shoulders to the roller. So it's it can be a common misunderstanding, but somebody with Reginald's experience should not have this misunderstanding. The roller doesn't actually roll. When the roller comes around and makes contact with a chainring tooth or a cassette cog, the roller is held static. The inner link plate shoulders articulate inside the roller. So the roller is not rolling or moving on like your cog teeth or chainring teeth. There needs to be literally zero lubrication between those two surfaces. So yeah, color of chain and wax adhering to the outside of the chain matters absolutely zero. Now, I have a feeling he'll probably contest this because he'll probably say, there is movement between the roller and the teeth. As load comes in and the roller settles into its final spot, there is some movement there between those two surfaces. That is correct. And so if, for instance, you did have a protective wax layer, so if you had a lubricant in between those two surfaces, that will, over the millions and tens of millions of interactions between roller and tooth, reduce the amount of wear of your chainring teeth and cog teeth. So that is true. However, no lubrication, because the movement is so small, no lubrication is better than a lubricant that has become abrasive. It is more wearing to your chainring teeth and cog teeth to have that roller as it settles into place under load on that toothface surface to have a lubricant that has become abrasive. And that is basically guaranteed when you run an oil or most wet lubricants. So on balance, and again, reality really helps us out here, where we get astounding lifespan from our chain rings and cassette cogs for immersive waxing. Reality helps reinforce that no lubrication between those parts is better than abrasive lubrication. And what you do get with your immersive wax chain is that for a time, there is going to be some wax on the outside of the chain and on the outside of the rollers. That excess wax does get imparted into the tooth faces and the tooth troughs. And for the time that you have those wax on those surfaces, so for X amount of time post each re-wax, you do have that protective coating there anyway. And then towards the, generally after X time, the wax will be abraded off the outside of the rollers and be abraded off the toothface surface, but it matters not at all. And again, what's really important there, if we're to draw any importance on this, it is between the roller and the toothface. It has nothing to do with what is on the outside of your outer link plates, and whether they're shiny and holding wax or not. That matters absolutely zero with regards to friction and wear. Sorry to sound a bit harsh on this point, but there's no other way around it. And again, my correction response here is commensurate with the level of incorrect information being presented. If anybody tells you that the dull grey metal of a Shimano chain is better for waxing because more wax is going to stick to the outside of that dull grey metal versus what's going to adhere to a shiny silver chain or a shiny gold chain, that person has absolutely zero understanding of chain lubrication for your bicycle and also immersive waxing. And I know that sounds harsh, but it is a zero understanding if you're worrying about how much wax is sticking to the outside of a shiny silver link plate versus a dull grey link plate.
Final thing you should avoid is this particular type of chain. What KMC have done is they've painted the in-between plates black. You can see where the black paint has come off those inner plates. That stuff is really annoying because, again, with the heating process of waxing, that paint flakes off and it contaminates your paint, contaminates your wax.
All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Obviously, it is an utter non-issue. Even if that is occurring over time, you're going to have, it's going to be sub a gram of paint or plating. It's probably, I think some of the KMCs are more of a either a titanium nitride plating or some are a DLC coating on their DLC chains, or it can be an anodizing. Whatever it is, again, it does not matter. Whatever sub 1 gram of plating or painting that is going to be distributed across hundreds of mil of wax in your wax pot, absolute non-issue. Again, you'd need the resources of CERN and some pretty controlled testing to try to ever detect a performance difference or wear difference between a chain that has the inner link plates painted on the outside versus chains that do not.
Okay folks, if you want to use my technique to wax your chain, you will need the following items. Firstly, you will need a chain. You will need some kind of metal container like this one with a lid, and you will need a piece of metal like this, like a headset spacer. This one is 20 millimeters, but you could cut it off a piece of metal tube. And you will need a cutlery holder like this, or a cutlery container. You can buy these in similar shops as this. And this one has had the bottom ground off it. It had a wider base on it, but now it fits inside here like that. I managed to find one shop in Brunei that does actually sell paraffin wax candles. These are only $2.20 Bruneian, so nice and cheap. A cheap thermometer.
Alright, so that's likely a big part of his problem there, was buying the cheapest candles he could buy. It's going to be very interesting to see what he's doing with the spacer and the cutlery holder. I've never seen in my time yet somebody using a cutlery holder in their waxing, so this will be fun.
This one is an electric thermometer and it costs $2.90.
Don't buy electric items for $2.90 like that. You are basically going to be buying landfill. If you want to get a cheap thermometer, just buy a cheap analog candy thermometer. That will just actually last and not crap out on you in short order, where you're throwing it and a coin cell battery into, yeah, the world's rubbish.
An old toothbrush, some galvanized baling wire, some kind of metal baking tray or tray, some plastic sheeting, a funnel, a face mask, doesn't have to be this ugly, a glass jam jar with lid, an old rag or old piece of clothing, some washing up liquid or dish soap as it's sometimes called in some countries, methylated spirits or industrial spirits. This cost $2. Kerosene. This kerosene is dirty. You want clean kerosene. A plastic pot with a hole poked in it. A plastic container with a lid.
Struth. It's going to be fun to see where this is going. Oh, he's got binoculars there now. That's about, I don't know, 17 more items than you need. So even if you are cleaning an existing chain as opposed to a new chain, which is a lot simpler, if you're cleaning up an existing chain for immersive waxing, then you will want a container and some mineral terps, and you're just going to smash through bars of mineral terps until the mineral terps is coming out similarly clear as when it went in. Dry the chain, then wipe that container clean, or obviously disposing the mineral terps, wipe it clean. Replace that with metho, a couple of methylated spirits bars, which ensures that there's no film left behind from the terps and the cleaning, so that the wax then has access to clean and clear chain metal. Dry the chain post the metho bath, and then you pop your chain onto your pot containing wax. You turn the pot on, come back later when the wax is melted, swish it around, hang it to set. Boom, you are done. You have prepped beautifully and perfectly your chain for immersive waxing and waxed it, ready to install on your bike. What is outlined there already sounds about, many factors times more complicated and probably going to be less effective than the much, much simpler process that is the actual recommended and normal sane process to simply, you just need to clean your chain and wax it. That's it, folks. What's going on here? Let's have a look.
Show you what to do to a new chain in order to get it ready for waxing. Right, take your new chain, open the packet, take the quick links as well. Take your plastic container with the lid, open it, put the chain and the quick links inside. Okay, so now the chain and the quick links are in here. Add your kerosene, clean kerosene, not dirty like this, clean. Fill your kerosene up until it completely covers the chain.
Just note, kerosene is really not the recommended solvent for cleaning your chain. As most especially factory grease. Factory grease is typically relatively stubborn, and kerosene is just far from a powerful enough solvent. It is likely to do a pretty poor job. Hence why the recommendation is mineral terps, or whatever mineral terps is called in your country. I think kerosene leaves you at big risk of just doing a very poor clean. It is, to my knowledge, never been the recommended solvent for cleaning off factory grease. Just note, kerosene is really not the recommended solvent for cleaning your chain. As most especially factory grease. Factory grease is typically relatively stubborn, and kerosene is just far from a powerful enough solvent. It is likely to do a pretty poor job. Hence why the recommendation is mineral terps, or whatever mineral terps is called in your country. I think kerosene leaves you at big risk of just doing a very poor clean. It is, to my knowledge, never been the recommended solvent for cleaning off factory grease.
And a little bit higher than that, you can go a quarter of the container or half the container, whatever works for you. Stick the lid on, screw it down tight, shake it vigorously for a couple of minutes, okay, in all different directions using different techniques, okay. Give it a really good shake. Put it to one side, leave it overnight with the kerosene and the chain in there. Obviously leave it somewhere that it's not going to fall into the wrong hands like kids or anything, and also leave it somewhere where it's not going to burst into flames. Maybe outside is a good idea. Once you've done that,
again, that's just sort of different and more faffy than what has been recommended for a long time. If you're using mineral terps, you're looking at a 15-minute soak for factory grease. Factory grease is quite stubborn when it hasn't been ridden or oxidized, and unless you're prepping a race chain, don't pre-ride your chain if you can, because that just brings a whole bunch more crap in with factory grease. But until it's oxidized by riding, factory grease is fairly stubborn. So you want to give it a soak, but that soak, we're talking like 15 minutes when you're using mineral turpentine. Doing an overnight soak, again, he's just adding time and faff to what should be a very simple and easy process. So yeah, mineral terps, not kerosene. First bath, soak for 15 minutes, and then you come back and do the next bath. Let's see where he's going after his overnight soak.
You can open it up the next day, empty out the kerosene back into your container, and then you rinse the chain with water. After you've done that, you add soap. Put soap on top of the chain, put your lid back on, a little bit of water, shake it up, same again, a couple of minutes. Then empty out the contents. Okay, rinse with water, and then repeat the process. So kerosene, lid, shake, empty, water, rinse, then soap, then water, then shake, like that. So you've absolutely removed every trace of the original factory oil or grease that would be on that chain.
Right. I can't categorically state that process to clean the factory grease that is outlined there doesn't work. I can say that's a lot more faff than, say, 3 bars of 250 ml of mineral terps followed by 2 bars of 250 ml of methylated spirits. And that does, apart from SRAM, we recommend a couple more bars because SRAM factory grease is really stubborn. Aside from that, for pretty much all other models of chain, it's just 3 by 250 ml bars of mineral terps and 2 250 ml bars of methylated spirits, and boom, you are done. You are talking about having completed your chain clean from go to woe, including the 15-minute initial soak, in about 25 minutes, of which you're only really involved for, say, 10 minutes of labour time, because the other 15 minutes, it's just sitting there soaking and you can do other fun stuff. Kerosene is likely to do a poor job, as I mentioned before. Rinsing kerosene with water, I don't think that's going to work super well, because kerosene and water aren't really it's not water soluble, so how good a job that is going to do, I am unsure. Then he's also using, I guess, a second solvent, being detergent. Detergents can work okay, but why is he using two? Typically, you're going to have a solvent path to do the cleaning of the factory grease or dissolving the factory grease, and then you are going to have a alcohol path to ensure there is no film left behind from your degreasing, so that the wax has access to clean, clear chain metal to bond. Overall, I would rate his recommended process versus the much more long-time established recommended process that we've had on for a long time. And mine has carried over from, my recommended process I didn't invent. It's simply carried over from both Friction Facts and also experts like M-Speed Wax, who have been doing this stuff for a very long time. And they know, because they've tested, that simple prep does prep a chain perfectly for immersive waxing, and since that time I have pre-prepped around 10,000 chains, all of which have been received by the customer perfectly prepped. So I would rate his prep as, I'm going to give it about a 2 out of 10, just because of concerns that it's actually done a good job. It's much more time consuming and faff, and he's likely left a film behind, so it's just, don't do that. Please follow the much simpler process I've outlined.
Once you've done that and you're completely satisfied that it's pretty clean, dump out your chain onto a cloth or some paper, dry it as best you can. Then get your glass jar with its lid. Okay, it won't have a rag inside it. Okay, so glass jar with the lid. Now put your chain inside there. Not a new chain like this, but the chain you've already cleaned. Put that inside there and add your industrial spirits or your methylated spirits, denatured alcohol. Put the lid on and swirl it vigorously. Okay.
All right, so yeah, if he's saying metho bath to finish after that, excellent. So disregard my last point on the vid.
They don't shake, you don't need to shake, but just give it a good swirling. Open up the lid, empty out the methylated spirits back into your container. Dump out your chain. I usually dump it out into the lid, and then all that stuff is going to start evaporating, but get your old cloth or rag, put the chain into the cloth or rag and give it a good dry. Really dry out that chain. Once the chain feels completely dry and all the methylated spirits...
Okay, yep, that's all fine and great to see he's done a alcohol rinse to finish, so negates that previous concern. But just note that wiping dry with a cloth will remove the outside solvent or metho. It's going to take longer still to remove that from deep inside the chain. My recommendation, if you wish, is to just blast it for a minute or so with a hairdryer or a heat gun. It just helps you smash through things to the next step, because that very easily and quickly heats the chain up to quite hot, which just evaps the solvent out from deep inside the chain. Otherwise, you're looking at it's best to leave it for, say, a couple of hours in normal ambient temps for it to dry inside the chain. And again, it's inside where we want the magic to happen, more so than the outside.
Once the chain feels completely dry and all the methylated spirits have evaporated, now your chain is ready for waxing. I'm going to be using a timer during this waxing process to see how long it actually takes. I will be pausing the timer when I have to relocate the camera equipment. First thing to do is go get a kettle to boil some water to wash off the old wax off my chain. Right, ready, set, go. So this is going to be a full kettle because I'm going to need plenty of hot water to melt that wax.
Right, I'm a little confused at the switch here because he's gone from prepping a new chain for waxing and then showing you the wax, but for which obviously you do not need to boil up a kettle of water, to now he's timing, including boiling up a kettle to melt off the wax from his previous old wax chain. Unless you have seen a very wet conditions ride and you want to minimize the amount of contamination you bring into your wax pot from such a ride, if you have just ridden in normal dry conditions, do not rinse your wax off with boiling water. only ever introduce water to your chain if that has already been done on your ride. Because of the extremely high contamination resistance of running a solid immersive wax, just from your dry conditions riding, there is so little contamination inside the chain, it is not worth the time, faff, or cost to do a boiling water flush rinse. You just relax and re-wax your chain. So interesting as to why he's recommending to do a boiling water flush rinse of his existing wax chains before he re-waxes them. Let's see where that's going.
Be doing it into my sink. I don't recommend that you do it into your sink because that wax is going to block up your pipe work. If you do it at home, I recommend you do it outside so that you don't, clog your pipes up with cold wax. Here is our piece of baling wire hook that I've made, and here is my dirty chain. Everything is going to go onto this hook. That's fine. It just gives me something to hold it with, basically, so I don't burn my fingers. It can go in there for now. Okay, I'm still waiting for the kettle to boil, so in the meantime, I'm going to set up the burner and start heating my wax. I made this for a previous project, so don't ask me how much it cost to make, but it's just because my burner is quite big, and if I put my heating pot on top, it will sit directly on the gas burner, so I need something to separate it out. So this is my pot, and here is the wax that I scraped off my previous chain out of all the little holes and gaps within the chain. So that goes on there. I keep the lid on while I'm warming it up, just helps it heat up a bit faster.
All right, I strongly recommend against using a gas stove burner to heat your wax. The odds that you will heat that way too fast, especially on the bottom, and burn or damage the wax is extremely high, as well as is the risk of getting the wax too hot after a certain amount of time. So you'd have to be there like a hawk with your thermometer and trying to heat it as slowly as possible. Just invest in a crock pot or a slow cooker, which in many places you can purchase for as little as sort of $20 to $30 Australian. They heat the wax nice and slowly and evenly, and only put a certain amount of energy in, so you don't risk overheating or damaging the wax. When the wax is heated too quickly, especially in a thin metal pot like that, the wax down the bottom is going to melt very rapidly, but it's got nowhere to go. It can't convect itself around. It's trapped by the still unmelted wax above it. It's very easy to overheat, burn, and damage that wax. One of the areas where people go wrong with starting out in the immersive wax path is they do it on their barbecue, their gas burner, their microwave, their oven, all of which have a very high likelihood of damaging the wax, or this is where things sometimes can get dangerous. If you way overheat it, you can ignite your wax if you get it to above, say, 160 Celsius, which people have done. That's where some of it should be a myth about immersive waxing being dangerous due to fire risk. If you heat it to only the correct temp by using an appropriate heating device, like an Instant Pot, crock pot, slow cooker, you have no more risk of setting your wax on fire as you have a fire risk of boiling up your kettle. So, do not use a burner. Also, the amount of wax he showed on top there for scraping the stuff out of pins and these side plates, there's no way that's one chain unless something very weird has gone on. I did do that as a test to see how much wax comes off a lightweight chain with a hollow pin and the cutouts. You get basically nothing out of the cutouts and all the stuff out of the pins. It was very small, and again, it added up to less than 1 gram. So that is either a very weird situation going on if he's used one chain, or that is a lot of other scrapings sitting on top of that wax. You do not have that much excess wax from the cutouts and hollow pins of a chain. That is for certain.
There we go. I put that on a nice low heat. There we go. Basically as low as possible so that the wax doesn't boil. I'm going to do about half the boiling water, and then I'll give it a little scrub.
on, wax off.
Carry on with the boiling water. Okay, just going to take the lid.
All right, if you're going to do boiling water flush rinses because you've done a solid wet ride, just use a container. Pouring it straight through open like that is much less effective. It takes time, obviously, for the boiling water to heat up the chain to the same temperature as the boiling water and dissolve and melt off the wax inside the chain. So get a again, an old metal container or plastic container, as long as it's not going to melt at boiling water. Pop the chain in there, pour in about 500 ml of boiling water, let it sit for 30 seconds, swish it around using the same swish you use for your waxing and wax pot. Pour out that boiling water, repeat to get through the, normally you'd do say 3 baths because you've got a kettle full of water, so about 3 times 500 ml baths. Doing it that way heats up the chain and melting the wax inside the chain vastly better, plus you're swishing it around in that very hot water with everything melted. You will remove the contaminated wax from inside the chain vastly better than just pouring it straight through. And you don't need to scrub the outside. So if you're melting it off properly on the outside, all you need to do after the 3rd bath is just with a cloth, you just wipe the outside of the chain. That will remove any really excess dirty wax that might still be stuck on the outside that you need to. So that path is going to be more effective and is easier. You're not faffing with a toothbrush and scrubbing. And quick note on that, just in case, you always do your boiling water swishing in an open container. You do not put a lid on and shake it. That will generate a lot of steam pressure, blow the lid off, and that is not a fun time. So open container, swish it with the same swisher that you use for your waxing.
Lid off. As you can see, it's still not even slightly melted at the top. So put the lid back on. Check the gas. Yeah, the gas is still heating. I'm going to take this chain off the hook. You can see, even though I poured a bunch of hot wax, a bunch of hot water over it, these are still a little bit grubby. The hot water did not wash off all the dirty wax. So I'm going to try and dry off the chain now as best I can. I'll give it a little shake over the sink now it's cooled down. Now I can touch it. Let's give it a bit of a dry. If you don't dry the chain, what ends up happening is you get a load of water inside your wax, which, as I said, because I've got a spacer in the bottom here, I actually have a 20mm headset spacer in the bottom of this tank, this mug. That's not such a major issue, but you still don't want water in there if you can help it. Now that's dried off a bit.
Again, drying the outside is better than not drying the outside. But this is where, if people are doing boiling water flush rinsing as like just a matter of general practice after, before every re-wax, which is completely not necessary and can lead to worse results because people do get slack with drying their chain. Again, you don't want water inside the chain because that can inhibit the wax getting onto the chain, and it can just not be awesome for the wax over time when you're repeatedly putting a wet chain into your wax pot. So if you have done a proper wet ride, and that is the only time you should introduce water or boiling water flush rinse to your chain, then blast it dry with a hairdryer or a heat gun for a couple of minutes because you want to dry it from the inside, not just wipe it on the outside. So you can still get a negative outcome with your waxing if you just wipe the outside like he has done.
You wind it up into a circle so that we can fit it inside this container here. I don't have a handle for it while I'm putting the chain in, so I can put my hand all the way in, but then afterwards I can attach this little handle here.
Not sure where he's going with this just yet. It again is just more steps and faff, and he's custom made his own equipment there, which is more steps and faff that you don't need to do. Normally, if you have needed to do a boiling water flush rinse because you've done a solid wet ride, you are doing that with your chain threaded onto the swisher, and you can just dry it, obviously, with your hairdryer or heat gun on that swisher tool, and from there it goes into your wax pot. Why the extra steps and faff?
wax is starting to become a little bit liquid, as you can see. So let's turn this into a nice hockey puck. So we're just turning it around in our fingers like this. You can measure it with the bottom of the can so you don't go too far, or the top of the can actually. There we go.
Obviously, just leave it on the
You could use
swisher.
an old baked bean tin for this and just perforate some holes in it maybe. And another bigger bean tin for your actual container. You could make this obviously cheaper. And then, because there's not enough room to keep going, we have to create a second turn on top. Right, there we go. There's our little hockey puck. You just drop that down inside there like that. And then I'm going to place this on top, but before I do, I'll stick my handles on. That handle a bit of squeeze. So now I've got a handy handle for dunking the thing. I'm just going to rest that on top and let that wax continue to melt. And as the wax continues to melt, it will slowly lower itself down in there. And not forgetting these quick links. Some people say not to bother waxing the quick links because it makes them difficult to put on afterwards. That is true. Or they say just dip it in the wax afterwards. I can't be bothered to do that, so I just chuck them in as well. That way I'm not going to lose them. I know where they are. Let's see.
So yeah, I still don't know where this is leading. That was a little bit painful to watch so far. Why that extra time to wind it up into a hockey puck and stick it in this thing? I have no idea. When you just literally, you will have already had it on the swisher. You just put the swisher on top of your wax in your wax pot, and then when the wax is melted, you swish it, and then you hang it over the pot to set. What is going on? Just on the master link, the reason why we recommend not to bother is because there is going to be already a surplus amount of wax on the end of the two links that you are joining, which is going to cater for the connecting link perfectly fine, because excess is going to be pressed out from that area anyway. You're going to be left with a very thin coating of wax covering the lot. When you wax a master link, as it sets, you get a build-up of wax on the base of the pins. So you then need to add extra faff in yet again to scrape that excess wax off the base of the pins. If you don't do that, it becomes really hard to push the master links through the ends of the chain far enough so that you can get the ends of each pin into the locking channels. The chances that you will miss one of those channels when you are reconnecting that link is greatly increased, and not everybody notices that, and so they can set off to a ride or to start riding. Only one side of their master link has been connected with a pin and the other has missed getting into the locking channel, and then that link fails. So it's just one of those things. You can take more care to make sure that you do it, but it's adding more time and faff to undo something that you've done unnecessarily by waxing the master link. If you had coming up a ride where you were going to push the wax treatment to its absolute limit, so you've re-waxed your chain and now you're going to set out and do a 300-400 kilometer ride, and you're worried that your wax treatment on the link is going to last that long, just put a drop of a drip wax if you really feel that you need to. But in all honesty, you don't need to. There is plenty of wax on the chain. You do not need to wax or lubricate the connecting link.
Check the temperature now. We can't really get the probe in yet. I'm going to use my very cheap thermometer, which has already developed a fault. And you can see if I squeeze it, the numbers come back. If I let go, one of the numbers disappears. So,
I refer to my point earlier about buying landfill. What a waste of just stuff being shipped around. The stuff won't get made if people don't buy it. So just added more landfill and coin battery, likely somewhere. Analog thermometer, if you feel that you have to have one. 99.9% of times you do not need one. So you definitely won't need one if you are using any of the recommended heating appliances, such as a slow cooker, crock pot, or instant pot, because your temperature range is going to be within the recommended range, no issues. So your, awesome wax window is really anywhere from 70 degrees Celsius to 100 degrees Celsius. If you hit that window, which is super easy to do, and you will know because the wax is just a nice thin liquid, you swish the chain and boom, you are golden. You don't need to know whether it's 69 degrees or if it's 85 degrees or if it's 98 degrees. Anywhere, basically from around 70 to 100, perfect. So the only time you're really going to potentially want to use a thermometer is if you are wanting to make sure you're not overheating the bejesus out of your wax by doing it on a gas burner, barbecue, some non-recommended path to heat your wax. And so again, it's just adding more steps and faff to a process that does not need it at all.
Even though we've reached correct temperature, the wax hasn't melted completely yet. Yeah, we're well over 70 degrees at the bottom of this container. So, but we still have a large hockey puck of wax inside. This is like watching paint dry, isn't it?
Well, just don't fall asleep. Sooner or later, something's gonna happen.
Okay, I just try to stay awake. It's just so boring.
Okay, I refer again to when you are doing a re-wax, you pop your chain on top of the wax, and whilst the wax is melting, you go and you do other fun stuff. Does Reginald, when he's washing a load of clothes, does he put them in the washing machine and then stand there and watch the washing machine wash them, and then put them in the dryer and stand there and watch the dryer drying the clothes? Or does he stand in front of his dishwasher? I mean, I can't help but get the impression that he's trying to make this as faffy and as time painful. It looks to me like he is trying to deliberately make out immersive waxing to be the most time consuming, painful, faffy, many multi-step process than what it actually is. Jesus Christ, you pop the chain off your bike, you thread it onto the swisher, you pop it on top of the wax pot and you turn the wax pot on. You then go and do other fun stuff. Most people have other fun stuff they can do. You come back whenever later when it's melted, swish it, hang it to set. Then before your next ride, you break the wax bond and you put it on your bike. That is it. Again, typically for most people, it's going to be between somewhere, say 3 to 5 minutes of total actual labor time to do it. You do not need to count the time it takes for the wax to melt because you can do other stuff. Now, even if he's sort of, I know he's doing a video demonstration here, but again, if you watch a cooking show, they don't stand there in front of the oven. They go, here's one we prepared earlier. So, I mean, all he has to say is, obviously, the wax melted, and now I swish my chain. Oh my God. I'm going
to pause the video again and get back to you when the wax is completely melted. Okay, so the wax has reached temperature now where the chain is fully immersed in the wax. What I'm going to do now is stick the thermometer in and monitor the temperature. The gas is off, so there's no more new heat going into this thing. Like I say, it's immersed in the hot wax. What you do is you jiggle it around, basically oscillate the chain and make sure that all the air bubbles are coming out of the chain, and give it a little shake. And then you could just leave it there. And what you do is you monitor the temperature as the temperature comes down, and then when the temperature reaches just under 60 degrees Celsius, you pull it out. And then the wax should set inside the chain almost instantaneously.
That is, yeah, poor again on a couple of fronts. So one, that this jury-rigged thing that he's made in terms of swishing your chain in the wax, that's quite poor. Maybe it's going to be okay, maybe, but when you're jiggling that thing around, the chain isn't, stuck to that. So most likely that is turning underneath the chain, and the chain isn't really moving hardly at all. It's just getting a little bit of vibration. Normally with the chain on a swisher tool, swishing it in your pot of wax, you are actively putting wax throughput through the chain. So you are much more likely to ensure you're getting whatever old wax that's melted inside the chain mixed in amongst all of the wax in the wax pot, and a good distribution of new fresh wax through the chain, properly coating all surfaces. It is just really easy to do that just by using a standard swisher, homemade one, perfectly fine, swishing it in your pot. that looks quite poor. Also, for those who are using a commercial wax as opposed to a DIY wax, the commercial waxes typically have some very fancy and expensive friction modifier additives. When the wax is heated, especially when it's been heated for a period of time, they will start to settle to the bottom of the wax. When you swish normally, then you remix all of those friction modifiers evenly through the wax. If you do that much more faff, time-consuming, painful method, you are much more likely to have the friction modifiers still settled down in the bottom of the wax pot and a very uneven distribution of those modifiers through the wax. It's just very obviously a crapper way to re-wax your chain and for more effort to achieve that crapper method. Now, the whole thing again about the letting the wax cool down to its near set temperature, I think that's something that was been mostly promoted from way back in the day by OzCycle, and that has been very thoroughly debunked. So once you start pedaling, all of the excess wax is going to be pressed out, and you are going to be left with a very thin coating on all the parts inside your chain. You only need that very thin coating. So whether you remove the chain from wax that's 100 degrees Celsius and you hang it to set on a 40 degrees Celsius day, or if you remove it at 60 degrees Celsius to lock in as much wax as possible, all you get for the more time-consuming faffy path is a lot more mess of excess wax when you start to break that wax chain in, and a lot more waste of the wax. Now, if you're using cheap candles like him, the excess waste probably doesn't matter so much. However, if you're using a actual good wax, then just dragging out an extra 5 grams of wax from your wax pot each time because you're letting it nearly set before you remove the chain, again, it's just a waste and it's a mess, and it gives you zero advantage for doing so. And this is again something that, you know, if Reginald's going to be doing a video on immersive waxing, don't repeat the debunked mistakes of other channels. So I know for a time Silka had promoted this as well when they launched their hot melt wax about, you know, getting a little bit of extra treatment lifespan. But even they've corrected that and do not recommend that path anymore because they realize as well that it's just a messy, faffy path for like potentially 10 minutes of extra lifespan, where that 10 minutes is just extra break-in time with more mess. This is possibly, referring back to some of his other stuff, maybe why he had so much more excess wax in bits, like on the outside of his chain, than what people doing waxing properly are doing, where just remove the chain after you have swished it and hang it to set, where you have very little excess wax then on the outside. You don't get wax locked into all those little cutouts on the on very lightweight chains that have the cutouts in the plates and so on. So yeah, 2 big mistakes there. That extra faff for his swishing technique is crap, and do not faff with letting the wax cool to remove it near its set temperature. That is extra time for a worse and more wasteful outcome.
So we hit about 80 degrees. Actually, I just want to show you what the chain looks like in there. There is some bubbles and there is some detritus floating around in that. But obviously the dirtiest wax is going to be underneath. But if I just lift this up a second, you can see down in there, there's my headset spacer at the bottom. And that's just keeping it about 20 millimeters off the bottom. So like I say, hopefully the dirtiest, heaviest deposits are somewhere down here at the base. So we are now at 39 minutes and the temperature is reached about 60 degrees. So wait a few seconds longer and we will pull this out. And with any luck, all of that wax in there should be trapped between the links of the chain. Okay, so I'm going to give it another little shake in there just to try and make sure that all the air bubbles are out. There we are. Okay, So there's my wax, looking a bit grubby. I'm going to filter the wax today and see how that goes. So I may reheat this wax now just to get it really liquid so I can pour it all out. And here is my chain. That my theory is...
If he's looking to filter the wax just for his own curiosity, you know, cool. If he's filtering the wax to remove contamination, to preserve the wax, I mean, why? Why is he trying to preserve extremely cheap wax? Normally, the only people who worry about how much contamination is going into their wax are people who bought the proper commercial waxes. If you're spending $50, $60 dollars plus on a bag of wax, a lot of people do like to try to look after that, as best as possible, but not those who have purchased candle wax. Why? I mean, you're just vastly better off, if you're worried, replace that wax much more frequently because it costs you bugger all, as opposed to faffing trying to extend that very cheap-ass wax's lifespan. But why is he going to all this effort around contamination for immersive wax? Because he's already running, apart from the fact that it's probably cheap, dirty wax to begin with, which could be part of his issue, but he's still running an immersive wax. So the amount of contamination it is picking up is going to be a lot less than running an oil. So unless every time he goes to relube his oil chain, he is also doing a full solvent flush clean of that chain before every relube, then that's the only time really we've got a sort of a somewhat oranges to oranges maintenance time comparison. Because again, so you lube your chain with oil, you go out and ride 300k, and then you think, okay, time to relube my chain. You're putting about 3 mil of fresh lube on over the top of the existing lubricant in the chain and any of the crap that's in there. You've diluted that amount of crap into 3 mil. With your immersive wax chain, you take the chain off, don't worry about all that other rubbish, just re-wax it. Whatever amount of crap which will be in your immersive wax chain, which will be less than with an oil chain, is being distributed amongst hundreds of mil of wax. Your ratio of contamination to lubrication is always going to be vastly superior for the immersive wax path versus just relubing your chain. So if he's normally used to just relubing his chain for X number of relubes before he does a maintenance clean, his ratio of contamination to lubrication is going to be monumentally greater than even if he did zero cleaning steps to for his chain before he re-waxes it. So you don't need to do those boiling water flush cleans unless it's been like a full mudder. You do not need to filter your wax to try to keep the wax clean. I hope the sheer logic of what he's doing for immersive waxing and all that extra added time and faff to worry about a minuscule amount of contamination to lubrication versus what he is experiencing all the time by using oil and just relubing. Short, it is the flush cleaning by doing an immersive rewax that is immersive waxing's biggest advantage, along with it being a solid lubricant compared to oils and wet lubes. And this is where the time savings come in, because when you are immersive waxing, all you need to do is pop the chain off and immersive wax. And then when it comes out of the pot, your chain is looking lovely and clean and brand new again. And again, the ratio of contamination to lubrication is minuscule for a very long time. Many, many re-waxes over many thousands of kilometers before you need to worry about replacing your wax to fresher wax. It takes an extremely long time for the ratio of contamination in your wax pot and then what's going on to your chain to remotely resemble what is going on somebody's wet lube chain after even just a couple of relubes. So that's where the time savings come in that you don't have to do that solvent or degreaser flush cleaning maintenance like you do with oils or wet lubes to try to keep them from becoming a liquid abrasive as opposed to a lubricant. You just re-wax and everything on that front is done for you. So what he's doing is he's taking the inherent, or one of the key inherent advantages of immersive waxing, which is that flush cleaning every time you re-wax, as well as the advantages of it being solid, and yet adding in a full cleaning process every time before he does the re-wax. I mean, again, unless he is advocating that everybody should do a full solvent flush clean of their wet lube or oil chain every single time before they re-lube, I mean, he's doing a completely apples to oranges time and faff comparison between the two differences. Like, nuts. It's either deliberate to show waxing to be as time consuming and faffy as possible, but what he's doing is obviously completely illogical versus what he's already experiencing with running oil. And I will bet he does not do a full solvent flush clean before every relube with his oil chain. So this is getting pretty nonsensical.
That my theory is that lying on its side like that is better than dunking it vertically, because all the wax will stay in between those rollers.
Okay, again, like, his theory is not incorrect per se. Sure, you're going to have more wax stay locked inside with those rollers, but again, you don't need all that amount locked in. After you install and do your initial few minutes of cycling, all that excess is going to be pressed out. You'll be left with the exact same very thin layer as if you just hang the chain vertically and save all this crap and faff. So, like, I understand why he's fallen for that theory and thinking, because on the surface it can make some logical sense, but again, it's just a lack of experience and knowledge around immersive waxing that it's completely and utterly unnecessary. And there is all the real world evidence, as much as he could ever want, that obviously hanging it vertically, regardless of the temperature, your wax treatment is going to last beautifully for the same amount of time, minus maybe 10 minutes of extra break-in time to press out all the excess wax. So, yeah, come on.
And it has taken 42 minutes and 54 seconds.
42! It was a tough assignment.
42?
Okay, so the waxing...
So just for actually doing the re-wax part, which is all he's covered so far, I can save you about 41 minutes of that, because I pop the chain off my bike, I thread it onto a swisher, I put it onto the wax pot, and I turn the wax pot on. I do other fun stuff, and I come back whenever later when it's melted, I swish it, and I hang it over the top of the wax pot. All up for me, that is around 1 to 1.5 minutes versus his 42, with a whole lot of unnecessary and useless crap furthering the myths and misinformation around immersive waxing, which is not good. It's also, I don't know what his time demonstration is of all up, because he's mixed in there cleaning of a chain as well as then waxing the chain. So is his time involving the initial cleaning of factory grease, or is his time just from when he's decided to start doing some boiling water flush rinsing? To me, that's a little bit unclear, and obviously you wouldn't normally take into account the cleaning time for getting rid of the factory grease within your immersive wax time. Really, no matter what lubricant choice you're going to run, if you are running a top quality wet lubricant or wax drip, step number one is always to remove the factory grease. So that is a step that should be taken regardless of what you are doing, because factory grease is for packing, not for riding on your bike.
I filtered my wax through this face mask here. This is the one good idea that I did nick from OzCycle. And as you can see, this is all the dirt that was inside that wax. So it was pretty dirty. And now this is hardened and can be removed. I'm not even sure, this might be reusable, but I've got lots of them, so I'm not going to bother. Here is all my wax. Now inside this container, it's certainly a lot cleaner than it was before. There's still a little bit of brown residue there, but like I say, it's a lot cleaner than it was, and that, as I say, can be reused, so that's good.
Right, it's not clear to me how old or how many re-waxes that wax has done, but it does look pretty dirty, And that's apparently within doing boiling water flush cleaning first as well. So for his wax to be looking like that, pre and post filter, really we can attribute that back to, most likely it's the cheap, crappy wax that he's using, which will no doubt have a very high oil content, so that gets dirty and gunky, as well as the other impurities which just dirty everything up. And they can, depending on where he's riding, attract and retain more contamination than what a much better wax base or commercial wax will give you. Again, I have extensive personal experience with immersive waxing across many disciplines, including a lot off-road. I have never, ever, ever in my life filtered my wax, and I have enjoyed magnificently long chain and component lifespans, as have, again, countless waxing people around the world, both from Zero Friction Cycling, but all the major immersive wax brand customers who are just removing their chain and re-waxing and enjoying the magnificent longevity of their chain and components from that without ever having to think or worry about filtering their wax. Just on that as well, I personally wouldn't filter your higher end waxes that have got the friction modifier additives. You could, potentially quite likely filter out a good percentage of those friction modifiers that you paid money for. Okay, you don't need to do it. It is a complete and utter non-factor. At X amount of time, typically say if you're dry road cycling, replace your wax around 10 to 15,000 kilometers of cycling. It can be a little bit sooner if you're riding very frequently in more high contamination riding. But for most people, it's at least a year to 2 years of cycling from a purchase of one bag of wax. So your actual lubricant cost, even if you're running the top waxes, is extremely low, and you get that back tenfold, potentially 50-fold in the savings of wear rate to your chain and drivetrain. So you are sometimes, you get what you pay for. You buy candles, you get candles. You buy a top wax blended with friction modifiers in it, you get what you pay for.
It's all cleaned out, so no debris in there. Here is my headset spacer. It goes in the bottom. And here is my chain. You can just dump it out when you're ready. We have one quick link stuck here. So pop that off there. And here is the chain. If we flip it over, you can see how much wax there is on the underside. It's actually smooth with wax here. You can see that everything is completely rigid. It's completely solid with wax. And it's completely cooled down now as well. This is quite cold. It's been sitting in an aircon room for a while. So this now can be sort of curled up and put in your box for later.
That is going to be a nightmare mess of excess wax flaking off. Don't do that method. That is the worst method of demonstrating immersive wax that I've seen. I can't recall one. The only thing I've ever seen worse about waxing and chains has been obviously when wax rubbing a solid wax onto your chain, which is obviously completely useless. I've seen another person use one candle to melt another candle, dripping the wax onto the chain. But this is up there with the worst waxing advice and demonstration I can ever recall. Do not do that unless you just want a lot of mess for all your extra faff time.
The fastest way to break the chains in reality is putting it straight onto the bike and then just turning the gears so that the chain breaks in. And while you're doing that as well, if you have one of these chains with the hollow pins, you can poke out all the holes as they go by.
Possibly his candle wax is really soft, so he's able to get away with installing the chain without breaking the wax link bond. Typically, most of the good waxes, that will not go real well. So you will want to break the wax link bond. So I will, at the end of this, I know it's going to be just so crazy long, but I'll to show you the difference, I'll play my waxing concise version and show you how you actually re-wax your chain and break in the wax bond. But it's very easy. You just break the first couple of links with your hand, then you pull it through, something, so around a piece of dowel or just really anything cylindrical, just to break that initial bond. Then you thread it through on your drivetrain, reconnect the link, and you can pedal it in the stand, but most of the breaking in is going to take place in your first few minutes of cycling. The whole pressing the wax out of the hollow pins thing, I can't even get into the mental space as to where someone would be, recommending that. Again, you're going to have less than 1 gram of wax in your hollow pins. I don't know anybody on planet Earth ever who is worried about potentially 1 gram of wax inside their hollow pins. I'm going to need a Xanax.
It's a slow process, but it's quicker than doing it on a table or something. And to catch the bits, you just put down plastic like this.
Okay, folks, thanks for sticking with me all the way to this point. Let's do some conclusions and some myth busting from what I've found. So, number one. One thing here is quieter shifting. Your shifting will be quieter if you wax. After you initially wax your chain, you've got a lot of buildup of wax that comes off all over your bike. And that clogs up the gaps between your teeth in your cassette. And what that causes is shifting issues. So you'll be going down the road.
No, that does not happen unless you're using the gunkiest wax imaginable. You do not get wax clogging up your teeth at all. The decent immersive waxes are very, very clean, and they do not gunk up or clog up over time, even over a very long time. So if he has experienced that within, say, a waxing or two, or even, I'm not sure how many re-waxings he's done, but it seems like he's just saying that point blank that's going to happen. That does not happen. That happens to potentially 1% of Reginald Scots in the world, being this one person. The freshly waxed chain is initially quite stiff because it's locked full of too much wax. So the chain will shift a bit sluggish initially, and we're talking like typically around the first, say, 2 to 3 minutes of cycling as that excess wax is pressed out. Once that excess wax is pressed out and flakes off, then your shifting becomes normal. That is it. That is the only impact. It's a little bit stiff for the first sort of 2 to 3 minutes. Reginald. No, that does not happen unless you're using the gunkiest wax imaginable. You do not get wax clogging up your teeth at all. The decent immersive waxes are very, very clean, and they do not gunk up or clog up over time, even over a very long time. So if he has experienced that within, say, a waxing or two, or even, I'm not sure how many re-waxings he's done, but it seems like he's just saying that point blank that's going to happen. That does not happen. That happens to potentially 1% of Reginald Scots in the world, being this one person. The freshly waxed chain is initially quite stiff because it's locked full of too much wax. So the chain will shift a bit sluggish initially, and we're talking like typically around the first, say, 2 to 3 minutes of cycling as that excess wax is pressed out. Once that excess wax is pressed out and flakes off, then your shifting becomes normal. That is it. That is the only impact. It's a little bit stiff for the first sort of 2 to 3 minutes. Reginald.
You'll try and shift gear, and you'll get dink because the thing's not shifting properly because that wax has clogged up your cassette. So you have to bring it home and scrape the wax out with something to eliminate that problem, or pull over the side of the road and scrape it out with your fingers if you can, or a pair of keys or something.
Is the biggest load of BS I think I've heard to date. No one has had to like wax their chain, reinstalled it, and then had to stop and scrape out excess wax from their cogs or teeth to get the chain to shift properly, unless he has just put liquid glug all over his cassette. All right, one moment. one moment. I'm going to take a quick pick. I'll be back. Right, just dashed over, took a quick pick of what would be my oldest cassette without any cleaning. The mountain bikes and gravel bikes can tend to get some jet water cleaning post wet muddy rides. This road bike only goes out in the dry. This is over 10,000 at least kilometers with zero cleaning, not even a wire brush to brush off excess wax over, X number of re-waxes. That has not been cleaned for, I don't do that many kilometers on this bike, probably only sort of 1,000 to 2,000 a year. So this is about 5 years, zero cleaning. I used to run, this used to be my road race bike, so I used to actually have different training wheels, and I had some playing around with like Omni Race Gold, also the Recon Titanium Gold cassettes as race cassettes. Went away from that and just went back to putting a Durace cassette on at somewhere around the 10,000 kilometer old mark for this bike, and it's now done 21,000 kilometers. That is how most people's cassettes will look after, again, many thousands of kilometers of waxing. Reginald doing some waxing and having to scrape wax off with an implement or keys to get the chain to shift properly. Two possibilities. He's either completely full of shit on that, which would be very disappointing, or he has managed to find the gunkiest candle wax in the history of candles. There's no other answer. This is how your wax life should look if you're using a decent wax, and that can include just buying a decent, if you're not getting a top commercial wax, just get some Golf candy wax. It is very refined paraffin, so it's less than 0.5% oil content. I mean, that is the most overblown BS around what you have to do post a wax chain break-in and shifting that's ever been stated. It's just utter nonsense. That is just so disappointing.
Right, next one. It's cleaner. You can touch the chain with an oiled chain, right? Once you've freshly oiled your chain and your chain is clean from its wash, you give it a good wipe with a cloth, and everything looks really, really clean. Your bike looks clean, your chain looks clean. It's not until you get riding a significant amount of distance that it starts to turn grey, and then dark grey, and then black, right? And then when it gets to that really gunky black look, you wash your bike. Or you should be doing anyway. As a bike mechanic, I advise you to wash your bike regularly. When you wax a chain and you put that on your bike and you start riding, little bits of wax come off everywhere. So you've got little specks of white wax covering your rear derailleur, your front derailleur, your frame, your wheels, your spokes. Everything gets covered in little bits of wax. And so...
Again, it's looking like a strong suspicion here that if his wax chain is not so clean to handle, that's his gunky wax that he's purchased. And the wax going everywhere like that is not the common experience either. That would be Reginald's experience by way of getting as much excess wax onto the outside and inside of your chain as is possible to get the biggest amount of mess that is possible, which, combined with perhaps if he's got a really gunky wax, may have also helped explain wax needing to be scraped off his cassette to get it to shift, because the way he waxed it, he had half the chain covered on the outside in solid wax. That's going to help gunk some things up in his cogs. If you don't wax the worst way possible and with the cheapest wax, you will not have these issues. And I know this is super long, but I just want to loop to the point that he's saying that, with his oil, that, it initially goes grey and initially goes black, and after X amount of time you should, wash your bike. Well, you know what? You put an oil on, after 1 hour of riding, it's black. It doesn't go grey and then black. You put an oil on, and I know, I test a lot of oils. You put them on and run them on a test machine inside, and after even usually half an hour, they are black. There is, aside from the contamination that they pick up from the air, there's also an interaction between the metal surface of the chain and the oils that just basically turns everything black. You could put an oil on a perfectly clean chain and run it in a Biohazard 4 clean lab. In an hour, it will be black. So, but what's of note to me though is that he's going seemingly multiple relubes before then cleaning his chain or washing his bike, which I am going to give him the benefit of the doubt includes a proper flash clean of his chain. So yet again, comparing apples to apples here, he is applying his oil, going out and riding, picking up contamination. The ratio of contamination to his 3 mil of oil on his chain. By the time he relubes, it's going to be less than that. He's putting 3 mil more on, picking up more contamination. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Let's say he's doing a full flush clean every 5th relube, which is pretty good practice for people if they're using a wet lube. The amount of contamination as a ratio to lubrication going on via that path is so much vastly higher than obviously if you are immersive waxing, picking up a lot less contamination, and B, every time you relube, distributing that across hundreds of mil of 100% lubricant. So that's why the wear rates on the immersive wax are so much lower, because contamination is the key. You can have great effective lubrication with a top wet lube, but contamination is what changes that from being an awesome lubricating oil to something that starts off mildly abrasive and becomes ever increasingly abrasive. That doesn't happen, or it happens just, orders of magnitude slower via immersive waxing versus oil. And that's why you get those enormous wear rate benefits. So this, just the basic logics of, contamination to lubrication ratio between his oil and his wax, he has not grasped at all. And so he is flush cleaning his immersive wax chain before every re-wax, adding all that time and faff into it, and yet happy to run a vastly higher ratio of contamination to lubrication with his oil chain and just relube it for multiple times before doing some intervention. That is not any kind of accurate comparison in terms of time and maintenance from one path to the other at all. And I hope that comes across very obviously now.
Things on a bike are black or dark, it shows up everywhere. So it looks like Christmas because all these little specks are white everywhere. Looks like a Colombian's wet dream, Colombian drug dealer's wet dream. It's just everywhere. So no, it's not cleaner. It's just a different kind of dirt. Now, after you've been riding a significant amount of time and you were to run your hand on an oil chain, for whatever reason you would do that, I don't know. What it says, you can touch the chain after you've been riding it. So if you've been riding an oil-based chain for a long time, yeah, if you touch it, you'll get an oily hand. Just don't touch it. With the wax chain, yeah, if it's early stages, if it's early days and you rub your hand on it, all you'll get is a bit of white. And if you're pasty like me, you won't see anything. But as you saw from my chain that had done 300 kilometers, if you rub that on your hands, like vigorously, you'll get a black mark. So you can't go around rubbing dirty wax chains and not expect to get something on your hand. Another thing is saves time. This is
I don't know what to say. I mean, obviously a solid lubricant is going to be cleaner to handle than a wet oil that has become black and dirty. Yes, sure, especially I guess perhaps with his wax, if you vigorously rub your fingers on a dirty wax, you will get a black mark on your fingers. It's still going to be a lot cleaner than if you did the same with an oil. Again, one of the more positive feedbacks that immersive waxes always come back with is the first time they get a rear puncher. Just the normal handling of the chain to get your wheel out, repair the puncher and the wheel back in, and you've got, maybe you've got barely a little mark of wax on a finger or two. It's nothing as opposed to the mess that you have and you're thinking, gee whiz, do I wipe my hands on my bibs, or have I packed a rag? It's just obvious. It's a solid lubricant. It is night and day with regards to cleanliness in handling, if you need to, in those cases of like a rear puncher versus an oil. It is stupid to try to argue otherwise and I guess knock that out as a myth that wax chains are not cleaner to handle versus oil. They are obviously cleaner unless you have somehow got a really terrible oily black wax.
This saves time. This is a complete and utter fallacy. It in no way saves time whatsoever. This is a much more lengthy process than oiling. I am definitely spending more time maintaining my bike now than I was when I was using oil. Simply because I'm still washing my bike the same amount. A lot of people say, oh, you don't need to wash your bike now because you're waxing. That's not true. As you can see from this, my bike still gets dirty even when I'm using wax. It still rains, still get mud on the road sometimes, still get road dirt. It's all going to stick to your bike. Just because you're not using oil anymore doesn't mean your bike's not going to get dirty. You still need to wash and maintain your bike, right? So I'm still washing my bike once a week. I'm saving about 10 minutes during the wash, because about 10 minutes during the wash, I'd be degreasing my chain, and I would be degreasing my cassette and my jockey wheels and my chain rings, right? Just because previously with oil I'm scrubbing, like my cassette, for example, doesn't mean I don't scrub my cassette now. Now I'm waxing. I still have to scrub the cassette because dirty wax builds up in the cassette. You still got to get that off. So you still have to vigorously scrub your componentry and clean them. Because if you don't, you'll get dirty wax rested on those drivetrain components. Sand and grit will get pushed into that wax. And then when you put your new wax chain on, you'll recontaminate everything. So you still got to wash it. This idea you're everything. So you still got to wash it. This idea you're saving time is nonsense. I'm saving 10 minutes from the bike wash outside, and I'm adding, as you saw, like 45 minutes of waxing. And then on top of that, you've got to put that wax chain back on your bike, which requires you to break all those links, right? That takes another 10 minutes. So it's literally an hour. People say, oh, you just get a load of chains.
All right. Oh my God. Okay. It just seems to try to conflate stuff again to make this seem like the most useless and most faff thing. I don't think anyone would have thought that waxing your chain is going to mean that you don't need to wash your bike if your bike is getting dirty from the type of riding that you're doing. Why would a wax chain save your bike from getting dirty? So just bringing that into the conversation, I don't, again, mean to sound harsh, but that's just idiotic. Whatever your bike washing needs to be for your own riding, be it once every 6 months or every ride, obviously the wax chain doesn't change that. It's just so stupid to bring that in. We are talking about time saving from a drivetrain and chain maintenance perspective rather obviously. This time saving is that by simply popping the chain off and popping it on the pot and re-waxing it, that has reset the contamination in your chain, beautifully re-lubricated it, and then you put it back on. It is 3 to 5 minutes when you are doing a re-wax. That is it. It is not an hour. Again, that whole thing is just utterly ridiculous. I know one person in the world that spends an hour to wax a chain, and that's Reginald Scot. Anyone with any working neurons and a few, just a little bit of exposure in immersive waxing, it's 3 to 5 minutes. So offsetting that, so where it can save time. So if you are running oil and you never clean your drivetrain, then sure, waxing is not going to save you time. It's going to add a little bit of time because you're now spending, say, 3 to 5 minutes of actual labor time to do a re-wax instead of, say, 30 seconds to drip on some lubricant. But you pay for that. You pay for that in a different way in terms of your obviously messy black oil that's going on with your drivetrain and the wear rates that come with that. For those who wish to try to keep their oil or wet lube remotely in the ballpark of the day in, day out low friction and cleanliness of immersive waxing, that means you need to very frequently solvent flush clean your chain. That takes, on balance, more time for still generally a lesser result in the end in terms of wear life than simply doing an immersive wax. And on top of that, you also have a lot of solvents or degreasers that need to be disposed of somehow, some way. So if you imagine the millions of households around the world frequently fighting against the black mess of oils and wet lubes, where is all that crap ending up? So that is the time balance. The time maintenance for oil to maintain that drivetrain versus what it takes you to do a re-wax, which is 3 to 5 minutes of labor time, not 1 hour. And again, I point to the sheer illogicness of the fact that he is doing a flush clean each time of his immersive wax chain, and yet he's not doing that for his oil chain, despite the fact the wax chain is going to be cleaner. It doesn't need the flush clean. It's going to be reflushed through with hundreds of mil of wax, and yet his oil chain is going to have whatever contamination in there distributed amongst now just another about 3 mil of lubricant. Utterly nonsensical and stupid. Now again, I have never needed to clean any of my cassettes from wax. I have never needed to clean any of my chain rings of wax ever. Zero. The only cleaning that they get is post full mudders when I'm jet washing the bike and whatever. I just jet wash the cassette to rinse off the mud. I'm not worried about rinsing off whatever wax is on there. It's just the mud. Very, very little wax is left on the outside of those cassette teeth anyway, and it's a non-factor. So the only reason if he's needing to do it, that's because he's using a shitty wax and he's taking as much excess of that shitty wax as possible to try and pile it into his cassette. That is not a normal person's normal waxing life experience. A normal person using a good wax and doing waxing yet normally will have cassettes and chain rings looking amazing all the time without any need to do any cleaning. The only component that I have ever needed to clean excess wax off is if I've got some nice coloured pulley wheels. So if I've got some, say, gold metal pulley wheels, because of the number of revolutions they do through a wax chain, wax can build up on the side of your pulley teeth. And so I'll use a cloth just to pull off the excess wax periodically from my nice blingy pulley wheels. That's it. And that takes me literally like 30 seconds every few thousand K. So yeah, this is a very special Reginald Scot situation only. This is an N=1 wax life experience.
Do a load of chains at once so that it's quicker, right? So you wax 3 chains in one go. That's still an hour. I'm still spending the same hour re-waxing those 3 chains and breaking all the links in those chains.
Obviously, no, it isn't. So it's 3 to 5 minutes of labour time to wax one chain. For those that find running multiple chains convenient, and that can be people that are really high mileage, so you might get avid racers or just avid cyclists that might be doing 500 kilometres a week. So they might run one chain Monday to Friday, one chain for the weekend, re-wax both at once on rest day. Or intrepid commuters that have to ride frequently in wet conditions, they might have a few chains lined up ready to go for the week. It takes probably, say, 1 minute more to thread on 3 chains onto 3 swishers as opposed to 1 chain onto 1 swisher. The amount of time to put them into the pot is the same. You're going to maybe add 1 more minute onto swishing the 3 chains and hanging 3 chains up to set as opposed to 1. After that, it's on balance, because any chain that you then need to run on your when the next, wax chain is due to be queued up, it's the same time to break in that wax bond for that chain to put on your bike as it would be if you had just re-waxed the same chain and going through that wax bond break in to put it back on your bike. So you might go from 3 to 5 minutes to wax 1 chain labour-wise to, say, around 7 minutes labour time if you were waxing 3. Again, only Reginald Scot is taking 1 hour to wax 1 chain or 3 chains. The amount of chains I can do in an hour, Reginald might be impressed.
For me, it takes even longer because I'm a weight weenie. So I like lightweight bikes, and so I spend a lot of money buying lightweight chains that have lots of holes in them. And because those chains have got a lot of holes in them, I'm having to poke out each individual hole with a toothpick, which takes bloody forever. And then you've got the cleanup time of all that wax all over the floor. Saving time? Rubbish. Absolute hogwash.
All right. Again, I'm lost for words on this. If he wants to defend the path like I'm such a weight weenie that I'm going to poke the wax cores out of my hollow pins to save not even 1 gram. Again, this is a Reginald Scot issue. It blows my mind. It is such, in no blind test could he ever tell whether or not his bike is 1 gram lighter or heavier. And if he was worried about having introduced less than a gram of wax weight into his hollow pins, there are a bajillion ways in both the clothing that he wears and the gear that he's using, as well as the bike, where you could take 1 extra gram back out and even things up, and just then enjoy all the wonderful benefits of having a lower friction chain and drivetrain. That's also going to save him a lot of wear long term. So, oh my God. Anyway, in terms of the say general mess that you got to clean up, depending on where you're doing it. So some people are obviously installing it outside. For myself in the workshop here, and obviously I've got a lot of bikes that I use, and I'm re-waxing my chains, relatively frequently, because I like to keep everything amazing. So I have just a large bath sheet towel underneath my bike, which is under my bike stand. And so every now and then I will just take that towel outside and give it a shake and then bring it back in. So we're talking maybe 1 minute of floor cleaning time for me of wax flakes every month or so max. So again, it's a non-factor. If you, I don't know, he's potentially not having anything. I mean, he's got the plastic sheet there. But again, he's going to have a lot more wax excess than basically everybody else on planet Earth doing waxing, because he's doing things a very particular way, which is the very worst way I've seen.
Okay, this is where that 3 chains thing comes in. So a lot of people say, oh, you're going to save money because waxing is cheap. It's not. Like, you've got the initial investment is higher. All the stuff that I need to use this, like my sponges and my soap and my degreaser and my bucket, and my brushes, I still need if I'm waxing the chain. I don't need to buy that very, very cheap oil. What I do need to buy is $20 worth of waxing equipment, and every now and again a bunch of candles, which is still about the same price as this oil. If you then want to do the whole waxing saves time because you can do multiple chains at once malarkey, then you've got to get yourself 3 chains or 4 chains, right? How much is that going to cost you? Now, if you're strapped for cash, right, and you can only afford 1 chain at a time, you might as well stick with this. Because otherwise, like I say, you're going to be waxing the same chain for an hour every week, basically, if you want to do it properly. Let's say it only takes you 30 minutes to wax the chain. If you're really good at this, that's still an additional 30 minutes per week that you wouldn't be doing if you were just using oil. If you're a successful business owner, and you can make a lot of money in an hour's work, right? Maybe you can make $200-300 in an hour. What's the point in you trying to save a few dollars on a bike chain by waxing it when you're only going to have to replace your bike chain once every 6 months? Financially, it doesn't make sense. If you can make more money in that hour that you would have spent waxing than it costs to buy a new chain, then why bother, right?
This one's about the easiest to debunk as possible. For a start, we've already established it's not an hour, and again, I will play how to properly wax your chain in like 3 to 4 minutes at the end of this monumental epic video. 3 to 5 minutes, not an hour. And for that, you save, so most people running a good immersive wax versus your, say, average for oil or wet lubricants, you are getting generally at least double and quite often triple or greater the chain elongation wear life. Too many people, it is much more likely if you are using an oil or especially just a meh wet lube, that the chain will wear past its 0.5% wear mark before you have realized. And so many people get caught out by that. And so then when they go to take their bike in for a service, the bike store says, your chain's pretty knackered, and now you need a new cassette and potentially new chain rings, or you've made pretty good inroads into your chain rings. So if you very conservatively double the lifespan of your chain and therefore double the lifespan of your cassette and chain rings For many, many people running even mid-tier components and above, they are saving hundreds of dollars per year. So whether or not you spend $20 on the crap that he used to wax his chain, or if you were to buy a better pot and setup that costs you more, you are going to get that money back very quickly unless you are running the most budget components in the history of the world, in which case you're still going to get your money back over time anyway. It's not like those components or the investment that you spent is going anywhere. Now, especially at the higher end, it can save an enormous amount. We are living in the world where SRAM red cassettes cost, $700. T-type cassettes can cost $1,100. Eagle XX1 cassettes can cost easily around $800. We have chains that can cost now up to $250 for a T-type XXSL, but even the SRAM red chains, Red E1, even Force, Exo Level, Dura Ace, there are a lot of chains that cost a fair amount of coin. And even just focusing on the chain, if you double the wear life of that chain, you will have saved $50 or more, which is well paid for the investment, and that saving is going to just keep going on and on and on. But then factoring in the full drivetrain wear, the savings are for most people quite substantial, and it pays them back many times over very quickly. So his argument against the cost savings is just utterly nonsensical. He hasn't actually thought about the cost to run and how it saves at all. Obviously, wear of your components equals cost. Sooner or later, you're going to have to replace them. If you halve 1/3 or even more the wear rate of your drivetrain components, you save that cost in those components. Obviously. Multiple chains, again, that's a specific thing. So some people that is really handy. Some people it's completely not necessary. So the mileage, conditions, and all that type of stuff. So and again, it can also be cost of component. A good way to not get caught out with only getting one chain to a cassette is to run multiple chains. If you run 2 chains on rotation, you are guaranteeing to get 2 chains lifespan through that cassette. So especially if you tend to ride a lot in harsh conditions, and so your chain wear rates can shoot up, especially if you're using a wet lube or an oil. And so this recommendation isn't just an immersive wax thing. This is just a smart way to roll thing for many people. If you're riding a lot in harsh conditions and you get caught out with your chain wear rate and rip past that 0.5%, then you can halve the rate at which your chains are wearing by obviously running 2 on rotation, whether that's oil or not. And even if you do get still caught out across those both and take them past 0.5%, you have still at least got 2 chains worth of lifespan through your cassette. Or if you're doing 3 chains, 3 chains worth of lifespan. So yeah, he's just not thinking on what is actually, I guess, the reasons behind this stuff in the real world, in real use.
Financially, it's not pertinent to do that. If you're retired and you've got nothing better to do, or you're a YouTuber, then you've got time to wax a chain, and more power to you. It's actually a lot of fun, I must admit. Waxing a chain is fun. And I say if you're a kid, you're probably riding around on a cheap bike, like I was. If you're riding around on Sora or Tawny 8-speed or something, how much does a chain cost you? Like 50, 20 at most? You can make that in a month, no problem. And you're not changing your chain, even with oil, with the contamination of oil, you're not changing your chain every month. So, save money, absolutely not. Oh, don't forget as well, energy costs. So I'm boiling a kettle, which I didn't have to do when I was oiling, and you got your hot pot. If you are doing it the hot pot way, right? Running that thing for an hour, it's going to cost you some energy. Or me, I'm using gas. So if you have a gas burner at home, you're going to be using gas. That's adding to your gas and your electric bill. If you live in Europe...
I'll give up on the time thing for the moment. I think we've covered that to death. It's getting painful. It is obviously not for retired people. It is typically for normal, sane people. The energy cost thing, it's a point worth discussing, but again, for most people, most of the time, you do not need to boil the kettle. So 99% of re-waxing, you just re-wax. That on balance for most people around the world. In terms of the pot itself, I'm not sure what gas usage rates are. I know, so here in Adelaide, electricity usage, if I'm paying full tote, say peak rates It is 50 cents per kilowatt hour, a 150 watt pot on for an hour, so 0.15 of that 50 cents. Then we're looking at about 7.5 cents of energy cost to heat my wax to do a re-wax. Even if you were doing the kettle every time, which is rare, that every wet or ride they do is a wet ride to do a boiling water flush rinse. If you weren't doing that, then post a wet, harsh conditions ride. If you don't want your chain to be a friction nightmare, you're going to have to flush clean your oil as well. Otherwise, if you just put 3 ml of oil over the top of all that crap in there, your next ride's in the sun, you are still going to be running a liquid sandpaper masquerading as a lubricant. So you're going to be offsetting whatever you are spending on boiling the kettle and heating your pot, which will be not much, against the cost of solvent and degreaser to flush clean your chain. Funny how he has not brought that in to have a balanced discussion on one path versus the other.
Your energy prices are massive. So you're adding all of that to your monthly costs additionally, where again, I need no electricity in order to oil my chain. To wash my bike and oil my chain, all I need is water and degreaser and the oil. That's it. Chain life, like people talk about the extended chain life. Okay, so let's assume that that's true. Like people say anything from 3 times more chain life. Here's the thing, who are they comparing with? Because Shimano on one of these websites I read said that you should be looking at about 3 chains per cassette, right? So every time you wear out 3 chains, you should need to change your cassette because your cassette is worn out. If you put a 4th chain, a new chain on that cassette, it will start slipping, right? When it starts to slip, you know that your cassette is worn out. With me, because I wash my bike every week, and I've always used oil, and I've always been thorough in my washing, you guys have probably seen my bike wash videos, how thorough I am, I get 6 chains per cassette. So my chains are not wearing out that fast, and my cassettes certainly aren't wearing out that fast. If you compare...
For a start, what's it compared to? It's compared to chains on other lubricants, and this is across control testing and real life testing. So when you get people who have been using even some decent wet lubes and oils, and typically getting, if they have been tracking, somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers to 0.5% on their chain before the chain reaches 0.5, then that's what they've been getting. And then when they switch to immersive waxing and they get 10,000 to 15,000 kilometers, obviously that's lower chain wear. That is halving their chain wear rate, doubling their chain lifespan. It is doubling the lifespan of their other components. So now, I mean, he's correct in that you can get multiple chains to a cassette to a point. So now the Shimano website is, I guess, fairly general advice. You will get less chains through a Dura-Ace cassette versus, say, an Ultegra cassette, because the Ultegra is steel. The Dura-Ace, the largest 6 cogs, are a titanium alloy, which is softer wearing. So you have to be much more vigilant with your lubrication and your chain wear rates. So you definitely do not want to run them past 0.5. But yeah, in general, if you have a steel cassette then and not taking a chain past 0.5%, you should be able to get 3 chains to a cassette. That is true. If he is replacing his chains even earlier than 0.5%, or he's managing to get 6 chains at 0.5% to a cassette, that's great. That is going to be very much at the upper end of how many chains to 0.5% you can get through any cassette. I don't think I've personally ever heard or seen of greater than 3, even with a good steel cassette. But how many kilometers? So if it takes him 15,000 kilometers to go through 6 chains, and it takes me 15,000 kilometers to go through 1 chain, I'm still saving a lot of money. Now, when I get 2 chains through a cassette and my cassette goes 30,000 kilometers, I will bet I am still saving money on my cassettes versus him with his 6 chains. So there's some detail in there that, again, he is rather misleading on when he's trying to make a comparison. At the end of the day, from extremely robust control testing, like what I do here, where it's over thousands of kilometers and includes contamination, as well as just years and years and years of real-world data as well, we know that just using a decent immersive wax drastically reduces your wear rate of your chain and therefore your drivetrain, and that simply translates into drivetrain cost savings. The other thing he's neglected as well is that a lot of people are actually very poor at tracking their chain wear. A lot of people just take their bike in each year and get it serviced. So when those people run their chain out to 1% because they never checked the chain wear and never thought that, actually, I needed to change my chain by around 3,000 kilometers because using this oil, it's already at 0.5% wear. They don't notice that. They just keep riding, and then they take it into the bike shop and it's, oh, hey, guess what? You need a new chain, new cassette, new chain rings. Wouldn't it be great if they were in that year between bike services using a lubricant that prevented that from happening? That when they take their bike to the bike store, they go, your chain is just approaching its recommended wear mark. All we need to do is replace the chain. Wear is wear. Greater wear is more cost. I don't get what he doesn't get about that.
With me, oil and regular cleaning, how much more efficient is it with regards to the life of your chain? Probably not that much. I think what people are comparing with when you've got your very meticulous...
Here's an idea. How about do a long-term test? Get a decent wax, not some cheap crap candles, and test long-term. Wouldn't that be an idea before you draw a conclusion based on zero actual experience or knowledge, just your feels, which are obviously incredibly biased towards the path you already like?
Chain waxing people, and what they're doing is comparing them with your average commuter cyclist who hardly ever washes their bike. I've got customers who I literally see once every year or two, and when they bring me their bike, it's oiled, of course, it's never been cleaned. Like, I'm the only person that ever washes that bike, and I see them like once a year. Seriously. So every time I meet them, I'm like, chain checker, yeah, you need a new chain, you need a new cassette, you need new chain rings. And they're always like, oh my God, I just replaced them, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, because you don't wash.
Okay, that is not the domain of just commuters. A lot of people are pretty lax on especially drivetrain maintenance. They might wash their bike, but faffing around with degreasers and solvents, they don't enjoy it, they don't know where to put it, and it just tends to be not done that regularly. Whereas some people are outstanding at their chain maintenance. Obviously, it is a spectrum. However, even amongst those that are doing some decent regular cleaning and maintenance of their chain and drivetrain, that still doesn't necessarily mean that they are tracking their chain wear. That's one of the campaigns we've been on, is trying to get people to actually track their chain wear in kilometers so that they know how their lubricant and maintenance is going. Because if we got most people actually checking their chain wear regularly, there are a lot of products that are very popular at the moment that would no longer be popular, but because people would go far out. Despite me doing some decent maintenance, my chain wear rates are still pretty ouch. So it's not just the people that don't ever wash their bikes like a commuter that suffer that issue of taking their bike in for a service annually and having to replace their chain rings and cassette. It is a lot of very normal cyclists who are also doing drivetrain maintenance but are still ending up with a wear rate at the end of their annual cycling that has been far too great for them to have their other components survive. And that equals, obviously, an ouch moment when they need to get their bike serviced.
Whoops, sorry.
Bike. Okay, so if you wash your bike, if you maintain your bike, if you keep your bike clean as possible, yes, this might not be as good as waxing, but the difference is minimal. Right, faster. So people say, oh, you'll go faster on a wax chain. From what I read, it's about 2 to 5 watts faster. 5 watts being the best case scenario, 2 watts being your average, I guess. Let's think about that for a moment. 2 watts is like tidying the cables on your bike. You get 2 watts. You'll get like 15 watts just switching from a butyl tube to the TPU tube, which doesn't cost you any extra time. When you wax a chain fresh and put it on your bike, it's less efficient than an oil-based chain, right? You've got a new, freshly oiled, well-oiled chain that's just been cleaned, and you've got your new waxed chain on your bike. If you race those two guys together for half an hour, the wax chain will be less efficient than the oil-based chain.
Are you kidding me? The guy who has banged on about pressing out the wax from the hollow pins to save less than 1 gram is poo-pooing the savings of 2 to 5 watts for your wax chain, which is, depending on a gradient of climb that you might be on, going to be, you know, easily on, say, a 5 to 10% gradient, somewhere around half a kilo to a kilo equivalent weight saving. Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! The other thing, so he has no idea at all that after half an hour the wax chain is going to be slower than an oil chain. Typically, most of the good waxes, about 30 minutes of break-in is the optimal to get that ready for a race. So you are going to have your super fast, ultra low friction race chain ready to go after you have waxed it and given it about 30 minutes of running. So no, they are not comparable, or having your oil chain faster than the wax chain, especially the oil chains that a lot of people are rocking around with what is going to be, and he knows, you know, fairly spotty maintenance. So absolutely not. In most cases, after the half-hour break-in or full break-in time to polish up all the surfaces inside, or the wax surfaces, the wax chain is going to be substantially faster. Why do you think they're using that? It's starting to become obviously the dominant lubricant choice in the pro peloton. And like every world record attempt for pretty much the last decade, with extremely few exceptions.
A half an hour period, right? Now, most bike races that I've done are anywhere from like 1 hour, you know, like say 50 kilometers or something, to, you know, 100 kilometers, a couple of hours, right, if you're moving really quick. So for the first 30 minutes of all those races, even if the race is only 30 minutes long, you're going to be less efficient than an oil-based chain. After
oh my God, no. So the instructions, since like always, is that you break in the chain for around, you know, 20 to 30 minutes before your race. For almost all races, I don't know whether there's, you know, any that really don't do this. Your chain break-in is just done as part of your warm-up before the race. So most people will be doing some form of warm-up before, because you don't know if you're going to have to be absolutely on the pedals from the gun. The wax chain's broken in just during that time, and it's ready to rock at race start. The chain is initially stiff or quite stiff and high draggy only for a few minutes, and after that it rapidly progresses to be quite fast. It's by, say, 10 minutes, it is likely to be reaching on par with the majority of oil and wet lubricants. After 15 to 20 minutes, it is ahead, and by 30 minutes, it is well ahead. He's pulling stuff from somewhere again, I think he's just making it up. He doesn't actually have the knowledge. Why would you start a race with a freshly waxed chain? You would only do that if you had zero knowledge. Why is someone who has zero knowledge doing a waxing chain review?
30-minute period, you'll be neck and neck with the oil-based chain. And then slowly over time, as the oil-based chain gets dirtier, you will pass the oil-based chain and you'll become slightly more efficient, up to a point of maybe 2 watts. Even though you've lost watts all the way through the race up until that point. What a lot of people say.
So he's just off on all fronts. So yeah, it's not break even after 30 minutes of racing. Any sane person with any knowledge will be starting well ahead because the chain will have been broken in. Even if they didn't, the time to break even is going to be probably in the realm of 10 minutes, and then they will be ahead, and by 30 minutes, well ahead. The difference between, I guess, where an oil chain is going to finish versus an immersive wax chain is going to be extremely variable. If it's a pretty clean road race, or like clean conditions road race, a lot of the top oils and wet lubricants are barely going to show any degradation in their performance. So as long as if you prefer wet lubricants and you're going to choose a top good wet lube, such as a Synergetic, a Rex Black Diamond, a Revo Lubes, and there's no doubt a whole bunch more out there that I haven't had a chance to test yet. There are going to be a lot of high-performing, oil options to go with. And for clean road racing, you don't have to stress about that product starting to degrade or suffer versus a wax chain. The fastest ones are just simply going to be slower than the top waxes, because no matter what the oil or wet lube is, by their nature versus a polished solid lubricant inside the chain, they simply have some level of viscous friction. They have some level of stiction that is greater than a solid wax. It's one of the reasons why the good immersive waxes dominate. That the oils just can't outright match them. There's just so much happening, so many moving parts. Those tiny differences in stiction and viscous friction. You multiply it by like 300,000 pieces of movement per minute as you're pedaling in the big chain ring, times a small number by 300,000, you get a watt or two difference. But yeah, that watt or two difference to start is going to be present for basically everybody if they are doing things normally, such as starting a race with your broken in wax chain. However, things can be quite different if we are talking about mountain bike or gravel racing, where you're out there in the dirt and dust. A wet lubricant or oil out in the world of dirt and dust is a complete mismatch of product to purpose. So the difference between start and finish for an oil or wet lube in a very dusty off-road race versus an immersive wax can be much higher and start to occur much more quickly. And again, that can be very, very obvious, or the reasons behind that are very obvious. So depending on the conditions and how long the race is, with an oil chain or wet lube chain, you could finish easily 3 to 5 watts higher versus a good immersive wax. And in longer races, things can get real bad. So again, just the things he's quoting, he doesn't know. He doesn't have the experience or the knowledge around lubricants to be quoting what he's quoting.
To say as well, what you do is you wax your chain the day before, then you put it on your bike and you go for a bike ride for half an hour, and then you break the chain in, so then you're working at maximum efficiency before you start the race. Okay, great. So you go for a bike ride with your freshly washed bike and your freshly waxed chain out on the street, and you pick up a bunch of dirt on your bike and on your chain, and then what? You come home and you wash your bike again? Or you re-wax your chain, but now you've re-waxed your chain, you've got to go for another bike ride to make the chain efficient for the next day's... Hang on a minute, this doesn't make sense. Oh, no, hang on a minute. What you do is you buy a second bike, you put it on an indoor trainer, and then every time you wax your chain, you put the chain on the indoor trainer and you do a half an hour hard session on the indoor trainer to make sure that your chain is efficient for the next day's race.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
So...
I don't know. Sorry, wrong screen. I don't even know how he ends up in these places and thought trains. I am struggling to think that this is his natural thought train, or if he's just been creative to try to pitch the stupidity of immersive waxing versus his beloved oil, because, again, that is potentially the most stupid thing or analogy around immersive waxing pre-race that I've ever heard. All right. For a start, most people, the warm-up, sweet. So you don't need to do a pre-day ride on your chain to break it in. However, if you are not going to, for some reason, be able to do a warm-up pre-race to break your wax chain in that morning, if you go out for a ride in dry road conditions with a solid immersive wax chain for 30 minutes, you will not have picked up a whole bunch of crap that is going to impact your beautiful solid immersive wax at all. If it's wet outside, then sure, you just don't go and ride your bike to break your chain in out in the wet, where the water is obviously going to bring a whole bunch of crap into any lubricant chain. No one's going to do that for their chain pre-race. I mean, worst case, if you had to do a chain break in the day before, you just put your bike on the ergo. Like, it's that simple. So that is one of the most embarrassing analogy situations I've ever heard somebody run through. So, Reginald, what is going on in your head? This would be like saying with an oil chain that, you go and do a 20-minute warm-up on your bike just to get ready for the race, but now you've done 20 minutes of riding with your oil chain. You've picked up all this crap in your oil, so now, just quickly before the race, you're going to have to solvent flush degrease the chain and re-oil it. Like, it's fucking stupid. I mean, oh my God. what is this man? You might fire back, or what if you don't have a no-go? Look, at the end of the day, so if you don't have a no-go, if you're not going to break your chain in pre-race, it's just, you know what you've got. You've got a chain that's freshly waxed. You know you need to break it in. So you just factor that in. You're either going to get to your race a little bit early and just do what most people do as a normal warm-up anyway, or just, if you hadn't initially planned that, could be because you'd planned to do a break in the day before and it's raining, well, just factor in the fact that you're going to need to break your chain in, or want to break your chain in prior to race start, just on the morning. Now, worst case scenario, let's say you can't get to break your chain at all. You don't have a no-go, it's raining the day before, it's raining the morning of the race, then, okay, you're going to have a chain that is going to be initially a few watts higher loss than the oil because it's not broken in yet. It is very quickly going to be on par, and then it is going to be ahead. The odds that it's going to negatively impact before it is positively impacting you overall in the race is, as I said, in all these years, I just haven't ever had anyone struggle to have their race chain or wax chain ready to rock at race start. It is not difficult at all. I mean, it's a simple darn thing. You just got to ride your chain for 20 to 30 minutes. This is not something cyclists who race struggle with. Oh my God.
I've really noticed the difference in how draggy the wax chain is initially, whereas I never get that problem with the oil-based chain. Bad weather, oil, every time. Now, I've had some experience with this. I've ridden through floods with my wax chain, and I've ridden in the rain with my wax chain, and it hasn't rusted. And the reason why it hasn't rusted is because during those rides, I got the chain wet early in the ride, and then I was doing quite a long ride. I was doing like 120 kilometers, and the chain dried out during the ride from just usage and being in the sun after the rain stopped. And so when I got home, my chain was dry. So I didn't have to worry about rusting. So I just hung the bike up and walked away from it. If it was really, really bad weather and I got absolutely drenched and I came home with a very wet bike, I'd spin off the chain, I'd add a little bit of oil to it, and I'd walk away from it so that my chain wouldn't rust. And then I can clean it in a day or two's time when I need to. With the wax chain, what you have to do, supposedly, if it gets wet, is remove it from the bike, shake it off, and immediately wax it to prevent it from rusting, okay? Now, if you do that every time you get wet and you live in the UK,
ain't nobody got time for that.
You're going to be waxing your chain an awful lot. Imagine if you wax your chain on Monday and then on Tuesday you get soaked. You got to wax it on Tuesday as well. Mind-boggling. The other...
You're mind-boggling, may I say, Reginald? All right, yeah, so you can't ride out in the rain or wet with a wax chain and then come home and just park it and not have it rust. That is true. Balance of things though. So if you've ridden in the rain, you do need to do something with your chain to reset it. Otherwise your next ride in the sun is going to be a grinding paste of wear. So if all you do post a wet ride with a wet lubricant, even if rust is not a concern, but all you do is relube, then you are going to obviously not have a great time with your friction and wear going on because you don't have a lubricant anymore. You have a liquid sandpaper. So you're going to need to reset your oil chain anyway if you want to prevent that. And that's going to involve degreasers and or solvent and a bit of faff and a bit of mess. With your wax chain, if re-waxing is not viable for you, and this is something that obviously comes up a fair bit. A lot of people around the world cycling ride very frequently in frequently tough conditions. So the options are: you can just quickly spray some alcohol onto a microfiber cloth and wipe the chain to remove the surface water and minerals, and then put a quick coating of a wax strip on top. Depending on the person and the practicality, so if this is like an intrepid commuter, that might be what they're doing at the end of each day, is they are just wiping the chain and reapplying a wax drip, and that gets them through the week until they get to the weekend, and then they re-wax the chain to reset the contamination that's going in there, with or without a boiling water flush rinse, depending on what level they wish to go to. For others, so if you've got, say, a really nice chain and a really nice group set, because this is your nice bike that you're riding and training and or racing on. So yeah, for me, if I get home from, say, a real wet, muddy ride, After I've had my shower and something to eat, I go out and I'm going to jet wash all the mud and crap off my mountain bike. I pop the chain off. I will, if it's been really muddy, I'll give it a quick boiling water flush rinse. I quickly blast it dry, and then I stick it on the wax pot. And then after that, the chain is magnificent again. It is back to silky smooth, no contamination, super low wear and super low friction and super clean. So yeah, it's a matter of balancing that. So if you can't, if it's not practical to re-wax after a wet ride, then you go with option B, just protect it with some wax strip. You are not going to be in any worse place, obviously, than if you are using oil. If you are going to be thinking, I want to re-wax it, but I can't do it yet, it's going to be perhaps a day or two. Even though you know you're going to re-wax it, you can just put that quick coating of wax strip on to protect the chain from any rust until you're going to re-wax it. It doesn't matter. Use a compatible wax strip and you can just re-wax straight over that wax strip. Or if you're doing a boiling water flush clean, that's going to take care of that anyway. So there are differences. You do just have to factor that in, that you can't ride and then leave it. But it really, again, most people do not struggle to simply stop their chain from waxing post a wet ride, because they are either going to quickly re-wax it or they're going to protect it with a wax strip. And that is just simply something that you do want to take care of if you're riding frequently in wet conditions. People who are riding a lot in wet conditions and using multiple chains, yeah, they'll just pop one off, stick it, dry it, stick it in the wax pot and pop the other chain on. And so once you've melted the wax and the chain's melted in the wax, you don't even have to bother completing the process. It's not going anywhere. So you just, take it out whenever you're ready and hang it to set, and then that one's ready to go if your other chain sees a wet day. It's not a trial. And for most, it sure beats the heck out of fighting the black, gritty mess with solvents and degreasers, which is what you have to do with oil, unless you're going to pay for it with a huge amount of friction and wear.
Advantage of using oil in adverse weather conditions, not just that you can easily top it up on your journey if you carry some oil with you, not just that when you get home it's a very easy job to top it up when you get home, not just that it's an easier job to clean the chain if you decide to clean the chain immediately.
No, it
but if you use oil, this oil spreads around. It gets places, okay? It gets unexpected places. What I find is that when I oil my chain, all my derailleur hinges, like all the pivots on my derailleurs, get oiled a little bit as well. And it stops my derailleurs from rusting. What I've noticed since I switched to wax is that there's nothing going on to those pivots and those other points of my drivetrain, and it's not protecting them. So I've had to go around my drivetrain with a lightweight oil, not this one, but a different one, and just add a little drop every here and there to prevent my drivetrain from corroding in what I live in, which is high humidity. So if you use...
All right. To say that he's reaching ever deeper to try to find more cons around immersive waxing is just rather an understatement. I ride, especially my mountain bikes, in the winter in a lot of crap every year. Some of my road bikes are treated a bit better, but before I actually started mountain biking, especially my oldest main road bike, certainly saw a lot of wet weather riding in the now nearly 60,000 kilometers old that group set is. I have never, ever, ever needed to add any lubricant to my derailleur points. You do periodic maintenance for your pulley wheel bearings, but that involves taking them out and removing the seal. But nobody is suddenly now needing to have to go round and start oiling their mech pivots by going to waxing, because there is a lack of dirty, crappy, contaminated oil coming off their chain to do that job. That is yet again a frankly insane point to make. Why would you want the dirty, contaminated oil coming off your chain to be what's lubricating those points anyway? If that was the case, geez, that's some excess coming off. But if that was the case, you would want to be cleaning that out and then replacing it with something actually clean and lubricating anyway. Again, where this man's mind goes is unreal. And suffice to say that, also for mechs that are tens of thousands of kilometers old from my off-road cycling. So my oldest mech is actually, sorry, not tens of thousands. My oldest mech that I've got is probably a bit over 10,000 kilometers old, with a lot of very harsh conditions riding in it, and it has never ever needed any maintenance on pivot points and so on. It is perfect, just like my 60,000 kilometer oldest road group set is, with zero relubrication of pivots. They are not missing out by not being sprayed with excess black mess crap from a chain. It's madness.
Protecting more than just your chain, you're protecting your entire drivetrain. Also, now when I watch,
generally speaking, cassettes rusting is very rare. If his is just starting to rust, that is odd. That is especially odd if he's using a cheap candle wax base, which is going to be oilier and gunkier. There's been a bunch in here that I'd actually like to see some video proof, such as him waxing his chain and then having to clear out all the wax gunk from his cassette after the 10 minutes initial break-in, as well as then his cassette rusting. It's rare. It can happen. It mostly happens for people riding in salted roads, so roads that are treated with salt to melt the snow. It can happen in other places, but overall it's pretty rare. If it does happen on your cassette, then again, all you need to do post a wet conditions ride is just spray it with some, generally say, isopropyl alcohol. That will get rid of the water and surface minerals from the cassette. Then just wipe it with a cloth, and that will typically prevent any rusting oxidation from happening. And that is about a 20-second job. On balance, it is still overall much nicer and much more fun to just re-wax your chain and do that if you need to, versus having to degrease and solvent clean the gritty, oily mess that your oil chain is. The other thing as well that you can do, if you are not re-waxing and you are going to instead put a protective coating of a compatible wax strip on top of your chain until next re-wax, just cycle that through the cogs, impart the excess wax strip onto those cogs. It's only going to be very thin, but that is typically enough to ensure that it has some protection. And if it's really bad, sometimes people will do that in conjunction with a quick alcohol wipe. But yeah, it's extremely rare that people have to really do much faffing at all to stop their cassette from rusting. Kind of coincidental, isn't it, that the most unbelievable amount of stuff being pulled in against wax, that this guy is having a rusting cassette issue. How convenient.
when I bring the cassette in, I'm not putting anything on it because I can't afford to contaminate my wax.
Quick on that one, obviously just lack of knowledge. You can put alcohol to remove surface minerals. You can put compatible wax strip lubricants. But also, if you're using candle wax, it's this gunky, contaminated crap wax anyway, you don't have to stress that much because you're already running some pretty dirty wax.
Easy. No. And waxing is fun, I will say that. But there are lots of people out there who are not like me, who do not enjoy cleaning, who do not enjoy meticulous tasks, who do not enjoy the additional brain power it requires to do this, because you have to be a certain type of person.
The type of person you need to be to enjoy immersive waxing immensely is to be not Reginald Scot. Again, I can't imagine anyone making a more incorrect video on immersive waxing than what we have very painfully covered in over 3 hours here today. He has made it the most complicated and multi-step process at every turn, completely unnecessarily. He said at the start of his video that he was going to demonstrate really the easiest way possible, but if you remove too many steps that it just doesn't work. Well, he's going to be rather surprised when he sees how easy it actually is, and there is no excuse for him not to know just how easy it actually is. Pop the chain off your bike, put it on a swisher, put it in the wax pot, turn the pot on, Come back later when it's melted, swish it, hang it to set, and then you break the wax bond and reinstall it. That's it. Boiling water flush rinses, maybe for some if it's been a really bad, harsh wet ride and you want to minimize the amount of stuff you bring into the wax pot. Otherwise, I mean, again, geez, you're diluting whatever contamination the wax chain has picked up, which is going to be less than the oil chain amongst hundreds of mils of lubricant versus, say, 3 mil, unless you are going to do a solvent or degreaser flush clean of your oil chain each time as well. Mental. And then his summary information around immersive waxing versus things. Again, it is the most incorrect that I've ever heard, and it's so badly incorrect and so illogical on so many points that I am struggling not to think that this was a setup hit piece against immersive waxing from the start. He's biased against it to begin with, and he has set out this whole thing to show immersive waxing to be the most ridiculous path choice ever, and that only very special people should consider it. Maybe he might wonder why all the people that are telling him, hey, you should check out this immersive waxing, it's great. Does he not wonder why they're finding it simple and easy and awesome and getting a lot of great benefits, and yet he found it extremely long and time-consuming and complex and thinks it's only for special people? Does he not wonder why other people who are not even, just normal cyclists who aren't mechanics can do a simple task simply, and yet he's done the equivalent of taking an hour to make jam on toast whilst being a chef? Like, this whole thing has been absolute madness. So when he's laughing at, waxing is easy, I hope you all laugh along when we put the little video at the end showing just how easy immersive waxing actually is, and not all this utter crap that he's presented here today.
To wax your chain.
Imagine a guy with no elan, no style, a misfit. So this is really me? A no-style gimbo with teeth the Druids could use as a place of worship?
So I've got all the time in the world to sit around going, oh, time to play with wax. Oh, yes. So yeah, if you're retired, if you've got nothing better to do, if you've got all the time in the world, wax your chain. If you're young and you don't have time and you've got a cheap drivetrain, it's not worth your time. If you're a successful business owner and your time is valuable to you, then no, definitely not. Nothing essentially wrong with it.
I run out of hours in the day all the time because I'm mucking around with so many fun things, and that is a big reason why I immersive wax, because boy, I got tired of fighting the black mess, trying to keep my drivetrains clean and chains low wear when I was using oils and wet lube. And since switching to immersive waxing over a decade ago, it was just a game changer in terms of, like, oh my God, the time saving, not having to fight that black mess. I just pop my chain off and I re-wax it, and it comes out of the pot looking brand new, and then it runs silky smooth again for the next 300 kilometers. And now I get 15,000 kilometers out of a chain instead of 5,000. And my wife got nearly 25,000 out of the first chain and 23,000 out of the second chain after we switched to immersive wax. Again, instead of she was getting around 6,000. And this is just a story repeated ad infinitum from those who switch from an oil or a wet lube or just a meh lube to immersive waxing. And these, I guess, the ease of maintenance and the extensions in lifespan and wear for those who ride off-road out in the world of dirt and dust is just factors above that yet again, because the world of dirt and dust and wet lubricants is a complete mismatch. What do you think is happening? Take the bearing seals off your front wheel bearings and rear wheel bearings and free hub and bottom brackets. See how they're going after some rides. Obviously a solid lubricant where much less sticks and it doesn't have that transport path inside is going to be vastly superior. And then you reset whatever small amount has got in there every time in hundreds of mil of lubricant just by re-waxing it, as opposed to diluting it in about 3 mil or having to do a degreaser or solvent flush clean to try to get it back from now liquid sandpaper to being an actual lubricant for only a short amount of time once you again head out into the world of dirt and dust. Just, my God. After that rant, many people go to immersive waxing because it does save them time versus trying to maintain the black gritty mess that they had with oils and wet lubes. So it is not the realm of people with a lot of time to spare. It is often the great path for those that are time crunched and need the easiest way to get back to an awesome clean chain that's super low friction and super low wear day in, day out for extremely minimal time. 3 to 5 minutes to do a re-wax, not 1 hour.
I'm not going to say don't wax. I'm not going to say don't try it. Go out and try it, but it's not what it's cracked up to be, quite frankly. So, if you enjoyed today's video, remember, do like and subscribe.
Look, it's not necessarily angry pro-wax comments. It's just going to be angry pro-reality comments and pro-basic logic and apples-to-apples comparison comments. Because it has not only failed on just basically every single information point, it's failed on so many basic logic points of one path versus the other. That's where you're going to generate the any angry comments from, because it is incredibly frustrating to be presented just utter illogical BS that in no way resembles what happens in reality, and presenting that as an actual accurate review and accurate information on immersive waxing versus oil. It is just a monumentally incorrect illogical hit piece, I think, for biased reasons, as opposed to being a presentation of what your title is, myth and reality of waxing your chain. The video on his side is entire, convoluted, illogical, made-up myth and absolute zero reality, and he should either have wondered why his experience was so different to what everybody else's is, or obviously just if this wasn't a hit piece, if this was a genuine video on immersive waxing versus wet lubricants, and he's ended up on a number of fronts where he's ended up in this video from like his genuine perspective and use, then double check it. Actually, perhaps reach out to some people with a lot more experience and pose some questions around your experience to those places, myself, or just those that, the top that sell immersive waxes in the field, because obviously they deal with customers all the time around any issues that can come up. They know what happens and why it may happen and what someone may have done and how to just have things running simple, smoothly, beautifully. If you're going to do a video like his, it should be properly checked and researched before putting this out. I am struggling to believe that this was genuine. I really am. And I'm so disappointed, because after he did what I thought was overall a pretty good job taking down Hambini's ridiculousness around hammer and punching bearings out and calling out a lot of Hambini's incorrect crap around that, I thought, awesome. Wonder who this Reginald Scot guy is. That was a pretty good job. But then, so we've gone from what I would have thought is, maybe we're aligned on some fronts to I could not be more disappointed with what he's done here, because you could not make a more inaccurate and incorrect and illogical video on immersive waxing versus oil. No one's ever going to top this one, I don't think. It's, unreal. All right. Despite that, probably the only person left here by nearly 3.5 hours deep is going to be my mum. Let's have a look at how you just actually wax a chain. I don't have the video file saved handy, so I'm just going to play my YouTube video. I'll skip some bits and I'll have the sound off that, and I'll just talk over it as I need. Let's go. All right. I'll have to skip this video in some bits as I am talking through stages, so it's not just me just ripping straight through it. But let's have a look, and I'm going to see if I can get a stopwatch going as well. Okay, let's try this. So I've got the master link ready down the bottom. We pop the master link off. You just have it in small cog, small ring, so that there's less chain tension. Removing the chain. Where's my stopwatch gone? Hang on. it is. Beauty. So now again, aside from really wet conditions riding, and only if you really want to be good about it, you do not need to do a boiling water flush screen. You just remove your chain because the wax is going to take care of that. So there was a little bit of chat there after I removed the chain. I'm now taking my time chatting through threading it onto a swisher. You can just make those yourself out of a coat hanger. Into the wax pot. Now normally you would put it on top. The pot is just going to be non-melted wax. You just turn the pot on and go away, and you come back later. So there we go. So that's 1 minute with chat to get the chain off onto the swisher and into the wax pot. Stopwatch, pause. All right, let me skip forward a little bit here as I'm talking through. All right, taking the chain out and hanging that to set. Let's add, say, 10 seconds onto my stopwatch timer for that. And so normally then it's done. All right, so now we're going to reinstall the chain, and I'm talking through the wax bond. All right, so there I am getting my one off prepared earlier. Let's try to get back to stopwatch. So break the wax link bond. Do the first few by hand. You don't have to set up something fancy like I've got there. You can use a whole bunch of stuff to fill in for just something to break that initial bond. If Reginald was not needing to do that, that's a sign that his wax is very soft, because he's no doubt using some pretty oily, gunky candles. So I've done that. Head back to the bike. So now again, I'm not doing this at normal Atom speed. I'm doing this at Atom chat to a camera speed and talking through things as I go. If I'm just doing a re-wax for myself, I am faster and moving quicker than what I'm demonstrating here. But even as we go, we are not exactly taking a huge amount of time. So make sure you thread it above the guide tab, because otherwise you will get quite a loud noise as the chain is running over the top of the guide tab instead of inside it. So popped my non-waxed master links back in. Sorry for the camera angle there, but I'm obviously just putting that. Setting the master link in, I squeeze the chain links together so that they're not going to come unset, and use the master link tool, and I squeeze that. Again, sorry for the poor camera angle. That tool will squeeze the links in the opposite direction. So I got that out of the way to demonstrate it better. There we go. 3 minutes. Add 10 seconds for the thing before. 3 minutes actual labor time, going slowly to do a re-wax. So yeah, doing that, spending that 3 minutes, every approximately 300 kilometers of riding, my chains on my road bikes went from an average of around 5,000 to 0.5% to 15,000. And commensurate increase with my drivetrain components as well for that. And as you could see, it's always clean. And all of those issues that Reginald raised are not present in my waxing life, nor are they present in basically anybody else's, unless you are doing things the very wrong Reginald way. Wax life is that simple. And that's why it's, again, one of the biggest feedbacks that we get from people who are new to immersive waxing is, wow, this is so much easier and faster than I thought. Why didn't I make the switch years ago? It is not, oh my God, this takes an hour to do. You need to be a very special person or retired, fuck me, to go down immersive waxing. That better do, 3.5 hours. Oh my God. People are going to see the length of this video come on screen and think I've lost the plot, but hopefully, maybe I have lost the plot, but yeah, so much to correct, and just on so many fronts. Heavens to Betsy. So yeah, let this be the most epic immersive wax correction video that I ever have to do. May I never have to visit these mental spaces again around this topic, because it is a painful mental space to be. So much so, I struggle to believe that that was a genuine attempt at sussing out immersive waxing. It is so hard to believe that that wasn't a hit piece from the beginning. And if that's the case, that's extremely disappointing. I just really hope that he's not that kind of guy and that he is genuine and honest. Those who know him better and know more about his videos against tubeless, against disc, against rim may be able to fill me in on whether or not that is more Reginald's general style of attack on something he doesn't like or not. But if that is how he goes about those, then I wouldn't want to have a look at those either. Okay, for the, I don't know, one person who made it this far, well done, even if you split it up. But I just like to get these done anyway, despite how ridiculous it is to make a 3.5-hour video rebutting waxing information. I just do things on this stuff. I explain every point properly, to hopefully leave just no dispute around which information is correct or not, and hopefully I've done that here despite the enormous time. And if there's one little bonus for making a 3.5-hour correction video, it's that if Reginald's going to wish to argue back on any of my counterpoints and corrections here, which I mean, that would be madness, but who knows? But at least he will have had to sit through 3.5 hours of me slaying correctly his information, and I hope that that is as painful for him as his 47-minute video was for me, which was the most painful video I have ever seen in the lubrication space. It was just utterly beyond. I hope I never have to do or see anything like that again on any information around lubrication, waxing or otherwise. That was beyond a shocker. Alrighty, bye everybody.